Chapter 69. It was fun taunting Umbridge. Ever since the fireworks incident, Harry had become bolder, and so had the rest of the students. They were beginning to realize that she couldn't put everyone in detention at once. By the end of the Easter holidays, she had mostly given up trying. Education decrees were springing up out of nowhere, aiming to ban anything that might bring the students, especially Harry, any joy. A full-blown revolt erupted in Ravenclaw House when Umbridge attempted to limit library hours to between 10 in the morning and 8 at night. She noticed how many students were spending their time there, particularly the members of the HA, though she was clueless as to why. The decree was rescinded within 3 days, after Umbridge had deducted so many points from Ravenclaw House that the hourglass was empty, and the students still refused to leave the library. She should have known better than to try to curb their study habits so close to exams. Now they were back for the summer term, with exams looming so close that Harry could practically taste them. Once again, students were mysteriously falling ill in Umbridge's classes, or simply not bothering to show up at all. The headmistress had vastly underestimated how much effort it took to run a school, especially when everyone was determined to make it as difficult as possible. Like all fifth years, Harry had a careers meeting scheduled with his head of house during the first week of the new term. He really shouldn't have been surprised to see Umbridge perched in the back corner, holding her clipboard. Did the woman ever teach classes outside of his? McGonagall looked distinctly unimpressed by the intrusion, her nostrils flaring. "Well, Potter," she said once Harry sat down, "this meeting is to discuss any career ideas you might have and help you decide which subjects to continue in your 6th and 7th years." Harry glanced at his housemistress, then turned back to Umbridge. When he looked at McGonagall again, a tiny smirk danced on his lips. "Well, Professor," Harry began, "I thought I might become an Auror." McGonagall blinked. She was well aware that his real ambition was to pursue a career in professional Quidditch and to steer clear of the ministry as much as possible. But then she noticed the look on his face, and a slight twitch formed at the corner of her mouth. "Indeed," she replied, reaching for a leaflet from the stack on her desk. "It's no easy path. They require a minimum of 5 newts, all at E or higher. Then there are a series of rigorous character and aptitude tests. The Aura department only takes the best. I don't think we've had a successful applicant in the last 3 years." This didn't surprise Harry at all. Behind him, Umbridge made a small noise that might have been a cough, which went completely ignored. "Given your grades, especially this year, I can't see you having a problem with that part of the application," McGonagall continued. Umbridge coughed again, a bit louder this time. McGonagall's jaw tightened. "There are a few mandatory subjects, defense against the dark arts, naturally." Another cough, and another, accompanying each pause McGonagall made as she explained the required subjects until she could no longer ignore it. "May I offer you a cough drop, Dolores?" McGonagall bit out, and Harry had to purse his lips tightly to keep from laughing. "I was just concerned you might not have received my note on Mr. Potter's most recent defense against the dark arts grades," Umbridge said sweetly. "Oh, this thing?" McGonagall held up a piece of pink parchment between 2 fingers, as if it was something particularly foul. "Yes, I got it. Anyway, Potter, as I was saying, you've generally made high marks in defense against the dark arts. Professor Lupin, in particular, thought you had an aptitude for the subject." Umbridge's interruptions continued, her voice rising higher and higher until Harry worried she might strain something, her insistence that he would never become an Auror growing more vehement. Harry would have felt bad about pretending to have an interest in a career just to annoy her, but at that moment he couldn't help but feel a spark of mischief. Harry knew he couldn't hold back his laughter, especially when McGonagall was so clearly enjoying the verbal sparring, and winning at that. His recent grades spoke volumes, particularly in every subject except potions and defense against the dark arts. He was confident he could ace both exams without breaking a sweat. "If you cannot control your behavior, Dolores, I will ask you to leave my office while I advise my students," McGonagall snapped, cutting through Umbridge's relentless tirade about Harry's unsuitability for any position in the ministry. "The minister would never employ Harry Potter," Umbridge exclaimed. "I suspect he's more worried about his own job than Potter's at this point," McGonagall shot back, her tone swift and unwavering. Umbridge recoiled as though she had been slapped. Yes, that's what you want, isn't it? You want Albus Dumbledore to replace Cornelius Fudge. I'm sure you think you'll be right where I am then, McGonagall's deadpan stare contrasted sharply with Umbridge's wide-eyed fanaticism. Harry sat in the middle, trying not to crack a rib from holding back his laughter. "Dolores, you're starting to look a little purple," McGonagall remarked, maintaining a remarkably straight face. "Perhaps a trip to the hospital wing is in order." Earlier that week, Ginny and Colin had slipped something into Umbridge's dinner that made her head swell like a giant blueberry whenever she got particularly irate. The Muggle-raised students had quietly sung Oompa Loompa songs whenever she passed, which only aggravated the situation further. Umbridge's hand flew to her face, her usual furious magenta hue intensifying as horror filled her eyes. "This discussion is not over," she hissed, storming out of the room. As soon as the door closed behind her, Harry burst into helpless giggles. "That was amazing," he managed to say, watching a small but satisfied grin spread across McGonagall's face. "You're not actually thinking of becoming an Auror, are you, Potter?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. "Because I hate to disappoint you, but I feel they have far too many rules for your liking." Harry snorted. "Oh no, Professor. I want to play professional Quidditch," he replied brightly. "I just wanted to see Umbridge's face." And it had been even better than he could have imagined. McGonagall pinched the bridge of her nose in exasperation. "You have been spending far too much time with your godfather, Potter." "Thanks," Harry chirped back. She stared at him for a moment, then shook her head. "Regardless, I have no doubt that you'll be able to take any subjects you please at Newt level, except perhaps potions. Professor Snape only accepts O-level students, and while I understand his judgment of your skill is weighted, I'm not sure you're quite there yet." "I'm studying hard," he promised, making her nod approvingly. "Also, Potter," she added, flicking through his file, "it says in my notes that you have been enrolled in both the Arithmancy and Ancient Runes OWL exams." "Yes, Professor," he confirmed. "Remus has been helping me self-study." "A few weeks of summer may not be enough to get you up to owl level," McGonagall warned. She studied him carefully and clearly saw something in his gaze. "But if anyone could surprise me on that front, it would be you. I shall confirm the request." Harry grinned at her. "Thank you, Professor." He wouldn't let her down. "Just do me a favour, Potter," the Gryffindor housemistress requested, and Harry raised an eyebrow curiously. "Make sure your little group gets the highest OWL scores this school has seen in years, will you?" There was a fire in her gaze that reminded Harry exactly why she was head of Gryffindor. "I'll do my best," he promised. It was an easy promise to make. His friends were going to blow their exams out of the water. The tension in the school was reaching dangerous levels, especially between Umbridge and the rest of the student body. The inquisitorial squad had grown tired of their point-docking privileges, now that all the hourglasses, except for Slytherins, were empty. Many of them began prowling around, searching for a fight they knew they wouldn't be punished for. With so many students cracking under the pressure of the upcoming exams, the entire castle felt like a powder keg, ready to explode. And explode it did. It all started when Ginny received a detention for wearing a skirt that was deemed too short. She returned from that detention at 2 in the morning, dangerously pale, with blood dripping from her hand. Harry caught the hard look exchanged between her twin brothers, and deep down he knew what was coming. By breakfast, chaos had erupted throughout the school. Harry barely made it down to the entrance hall, relying on all his knowledge of the secret passageways to avoid getting caught up in one prank or another. One corridor had everyone who entered it turning upside down and walking on the ceiling. Another seemed to have turned to ice, sending people sliding around in every direction. There were large, brightly coloured soap bubbles floating through the air that belched when popped, covering unsuspecting victims in vibrant paint. Rumour had it that there was even a literal swamp somewhere in the East Wing. In the entrance hall, Harry spotted Umbridge, drenched from head to toe in lurid green paint, hands on her hips as she glared at the Weasley twins. "You think this is funny, do you?" she accused. The twins exchanged a look before George replied nonchalantly, "Pretty funny, yeah." Just then Filch, covered in yellow paint, came skidding around the corner, brandishing some soggy parchment. "I've got the forms, headmistress," he crowed with delight, and a dangerous smile crept onto Umbridge's face. "Excellent. You too," she said, stepping closer in a threatening manner, "are about to learn what happens to delinquents like you in my school." The twins remained unfazed. "Nah," Fred shrugged. "Don't think we are." George nodded in agreement. Harry watched, his heart racing, as the two of them cheekily sassed Umbridge before summoning their brooms and soaring into the air above the crowd. The front doors stood wide open, and Harry couldn't help but laugh when George swooped down low, blowing a dramatic kiss to Blaise and his group of Slytherins. Blaise rolled his eyes, but a smile crept onto his face. Then, just like that, they were off, out of school in a blaze of glory, just as they deserved. Umbridge looked as if she might have a heart attack right then and there, staring after them until she realized how many students were watching her. With a frustrated shout, she ordered them all to get on with their mornings. For the rest of the day, the story of the flight of Fred and George spread like wildfire through the school. Those who had witnessed it regaled their peers, who listened with envy, wishing they could have been part of the spectacle. Much like the fireworks, there was some kind of anti-vanishing spell on the paint, and Umbridge was forced to teach while looking like Slimer from Ghostbusters, right up until lunchtime when she could finally escape for a shower. The only somber note amidst the excitement was the sight of Angelina and Lee curled up on the twins' usual sofa in the common room late that evening, their faces weary from trying to maintain smiles despite their best friends being gone. Harry approached them cautiously. "Did you know it was coming?" he asked. "Yeah," Lee confirmed. "We said our goodbyes. We'll see them in a few months." Still, his voice carried a hint of sadness. "Listen," Harry leaned in closer. "I've got ways of getting letters in and out of the castle. I know where the twins will be. If you want to write to them, just let me know. I'll make it happen." Both of them brightened at that, though Angelina regarded him thoughtfully. "You're full of surprises, Potter," she said. "Fred and George always said you had more mischief in you than you let on, but I never really believed it until this year." Harry grinned lopsidedly. "Been a bit busy most other years," he replied. Besides, the twins always had mischief covered, she pointed out wryly. You're not wrong there, he agreed, shaking his head with a fond exasperation. Thanks for the offer, Harry. I'll probably have a letter for you in a week or so. Let them know what madness they've spawned in their wake. Sounds good. Harry bid them good night and headed up to his room. He settled himself in his bed curtains, took out the mirror, and called out, "Hey, Padfoot, did you get the package today?" Sirius snorted. "If by package you mean those red-headed demons of yours, then yes, they showed up safe and sound just after lunchtime. They had one hell of a story, too." "I'll pensive the memory this summer," Harry promised. "I saw everything. It was brilliant." The animagus grinned. "Good, good. Were you just checking to see if they made it safely, or do you have time for a chat?" "I've got time," Harry assured him, getting more comfortable. "I actually wanted your advice on something." "Boyfriend or exams?" Harry laughed. "Neither. I've been thinking, now that the twins are gone, I'm really the only bit of the Marauders' legacy left in this school. Maybe I should take up the mantle a bit." So far he had only done little things to annoy Umbridge and sneaked around the school in his fox form at night when it was easy to be mistaken for a cat. Umbridge would think she was safe now that the twins were gone. He couldn't let that happen. Harry wasn't the only one determined to fill the void left by the Weasley twins. Everyone was trying their hand at becoming the next master prankster, inspired by their boldness. It was now impossible to go anywhere without a bubblehead charm, due to the number of dung bombs being dropped everywhere. Harry was highly amused to see one of the Ravenclaw seventh-year prefects herding a group of first and second years down to dinner on one of the worst days, all the kids' heads encased in bubbles. A giant bubble filled the room, resembling some sort of ridiculous aquarium. A niffler had found its way into Umbridge's office, and the suits of armour were prone to jumping out and challenging students to anything from duels to dance-offs. Amidst all this chaos, Peeves was fully embracing the twins' parting shot, creating more mayhem than Harry could remember in all his years at Hogwarts combined. Despite Filch's determination to get permission to exorcise the poltergeist, that plan had yet to materialize. With so many troublemakers emerging, Filch struggled to keep track of them all, pacing the corridors and yelling at any student he encountered, yet he couldn't manage to punish any of them. When he wasn't stationed at the edge of the swamp in the East Wing, a spot Umbridge had failed to eliminate despite numerous attempts, he was hauling in any students who couldn't manage to levitate themselves. Harry had spent one memorable lunch hour disguised as a fox, watching as Filch punted first-years across the foul-smelling miniature biome. To add to the hilarity, members of the inquisitorial squad kept suffering strange, mysterious accidents that left them unable to assist Umbridge in controlling this wave of chaos. Nothing serious, but it was all incredibly entertaining. Harry hadn't felt the urge to join in until a few days after the twins' departure, when the initial wave of pranks began to dwindle. That's when he prepared his supplies, ready to spring into action as soon as curfew had passed. He had invited Draco to join him, hoping for some quality time with his boyfriend, but apparently Draco had studying to do. To Harry's surprise, a different Slytherin was waiting for him outside the Gryffindor common room. "Is that you, Harry?" Blaise whispered, noticing the portrait swing open for what seemed like no one. Harry lowered the hood of his cloak. "Everything all right?" Blaise smirked. "Draco said you were up to something fun and needed a helping hand. I had nothing better to do tonight." Harry stared at him, intrigued. Blaise looked surprised for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, all right then." He wouldn't turn down an assistant. "Come on." To his credit, Blaise didn't flinch at the sight of a floating, disembodied head as they made their way down to the great hall. Whenever someone approached, Harry pulled his hood back up. While Blaise wasn't a member of the inquisitorial squad, Slytherins seemed to have free rein these days, even those dating Weasleys, apparently. "So, what's the plan?" Blaise asked eagerly once they entered the great hall. The room was eerily quiet at this late hour, with stars twinkling overhead. Harry properly shed the cloak, stuffing it into his bag. "First things first," he declared, striding up to the head table. When he reached the headmistress's chair, he quickly vanished it, and then cast a glamour to make it look perfectly ordinary. Umbridge would fall right through when she sat down for breakfast. Blaise snorted at the sight. "Good, but a little tame," he drawled. Harry straightened, placing his bag on the table and pulling out several egg-shaped objects. "This is the main plan. That was just for my own amusement," he admitted. "I need these eggs hidden up in the rafters. They're already enchanted. Whenever Umbridge says the word detention, one will fall down, splatter whatever it lands on with slime, and hatch an origami toad that'll follow her around, repeating everything she says back at her." Umbridge couldn't go 5 minutes without screaming for someone to be put in detention, so Harry was confident all the eggs would hatch by the end of breakfast. She'd be hearing her own voice echoed back at her 20 times over all day. Oh, and I wanted to hex the table to dump her food in her lap. It was a classic, after all. Blaise stared at him, a reluctant admiration in his eyes. "You devious little bastard," he remarked. "I'm in. Where do we start?" "Do you want me?" With the two of them working together, setting up the eggs went much faster than it would have with Harry alone. Once they finished, they stood at the doors and surveyed their handiwork, all cleverly concealed under disillusionment charms. "This should make for an interesting morning," Harry said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "George will be sad to have missed this," Blaise mused, a hint of nostalgia in his tone. Harry glanced at him. "Yeah, but you know he'll be incredibly proud once he hears you were involved." He watched as a blush crept across Blaise's face, making him smile even wider. "Hey, I can sneak letters to him if you want to write," Harry offered. Blaise would be missing the twins a lot, and he deserved the same connection as Angelina and Lee. Blaise raised his eyebrows. "Umbridge is monitoring every letter that crosses the wards." "She certainly thinks she is," Harry replied mischievously. "You can really get a letter to him? And he can write back?" Blaise's voice was filled with hope, sending a pang through Harry's chest. Those boys were so smitten, it warmed his heart to see it. "It takes a couple of days, but yeah." If Snape couldn't deliver letters, Kerry was always up for the task, and no one had figured out yet that they needed to ward against house elves. Harry was amazed he was the only one who had spotted such an obvious flaw in the school's defences. "Brilliant." Blaise ran a hand over his short hair. "I'll have a letter for you by the weekend." "Thanks, Harry." "Happy to help." Harry bumped Blaise's shoulder companionably with his own. "You two are good for each other." At first he hadn't been sure, but seeing them together made perfect sense, especially now that he had discovered this mischievous side of Blaise. "It won't be easy, my last 2 years now that he's graduated," Blaise admitted, "but we'll make it work, and it'll be easier once Umbridge is gone." There was no doubt in anyone's mind that Umbridge would not last forever. Last until September. She won't be the one to break the Dada curse. I hope so. Suddenly a loud noise echoed outside the hall, causing both of them to freeze. "We should get to bed." Blaise nodded, watching Harry disappear under his invisibility cloak. He shook his head in amazement. "I can't believe you have a cloak like that," he murmured enviously. Harry chuckled softly and wished the Slytherin good night as he headed back up to Gryffindor. Maybe next time he'd share the secret of the Marauders' map with Blaise. Harry's prank unfolded flawlessly, leaving no clear signs for Umbridge to place the blame. The enchanted frogs followed her around all day, resisting every attempt she made to vanish them, whether by burning, freezing, stunning, or anything else she could conjure. Flitwick quietly awarded 30 points to whoever had devised such ingenious magic, but the rubies in the Gryffindor hourglass revealed nothing and didn't last long. Yet no one cared about house points anymore. The only thing that mattered was the Quidditch Cup, and no one wanted it more than Angelina Johnson. With the last-minute need for a replacement pair of Gryffindor beaters, expectations were low. 5th and 7th years were too stressed about exams to sacrifice their precious free time, and the younger candidates, well, they weren't exactly stellar. After a rather chaotic tryout, they ended up with a pair of 3rd years, Andrew Kirk and Jack Sloper. They weren't the worst beaters Harry had ever seen, but they were certainly close. "It's just one match," Angelina muttered to herself at breakfast before the game. "We just need a 60-point lead to take the cup." "You'll get it," Harry reassured her confidently, feeling a bit strange in jeans and a t-shirt, while the rest of the team donned their Quidditch gear. "You're all great at dodging bludgers. You'll be fine." And they would. Harry knew they certainly needed to perform well. Kirk and Sloper seemed more likely to hit themselves with their bats than to hit a bludger. He couldn't believe how little talent there was among the younger years in Gryffindor. It didn't bode well for next year's cup. He and Neville headed to find a good seat in the stands, Harry's stomach churning with anxiety. "I hate this," he muttered, and Neville clapped him on the shoulder. "You'll be back out there next year," Neville said confidently. Harry hoped he was right. The match began, but Lee Jordan's commentary wasn't as lively as usual. While the female members of the Gryffindor Quidditch team were performing excellently as always, it was clear the two boys were struggling. At one point, Kirk was so terrified of a bludger coming toward him that he screamed and fell off his broom. Harry clenched his hands in his lap, his eyes glued to the game. He had already spotted the snitch 3 times and was desperately trying to will Ginny to notice it. Unfortunately, the Ravenclaw beaters were targeting her, giving Cho the best chance to score. With ineffective beaters, Ginny could do little more than dodge and hope for the best. At one moment, Harry noticed Hagrid further down in the stands. He looked as bruised and battered as he had all term, and was deep in conversation with Ron and Hermione. After a brief chat, the trio left the stands. Harry felt a twinge of curiosity about what was going on. He had tried to talk to Hagrid about the injuries he had been sustaining, especially after receiving some cryptic warnings from Firenze. But Hagrid just kept insisting that Harry had enough on his plate. With any luck, Ron and Hermione would be able to help Hagrid with whatever he was dealing with. Shaking off his concerns, Harry turned back to the match, his gaze flicking to the scoreboard in the commentator's box. Gryffindor was down 60-30, and their chasers were struggling to maintain possession of the quaffle. "Come on, Ginny," Harry urged, watching the redhead soar through the air. The game had dragged on for another 20 minutes, with the score standing at 90-40. Finally, Ginny made a sharp dive, a bludger hot on her tail. Harry followed her gaze and spotted the glint of gold, leaning forward in his seat. The bludger chasing her was actually doing her a favor. It kept Cho from getting close, forcing her to circle awkwardly around Ginny's dive. "Yes, yes, go!" Neville muttered excitedly at Harry's side, practically jumping to his feet. Ginny's hand closed around the tiny golden ball, and the Gryffindor stands erupted in cheers. Harry sprang up, shouting and hugging Neville. He didn't mind being in the crowd, reveling in the huddle of red and gold as he watched the team celebrate their hard-fought victory lap. It stung not to be out there with them, but there was always next year. Angelina and Alicia took an extra lap, just the two of them, bidding farewell to the pitch they had cherished for the past 7 years. Cheering came not only from Gryffindor supporters. Harry whistled loudly and whooped in celebration. They were soon joined by Roger Davies, who would also be graduating in a few weeks. The three of them flew together before tumbling down to the grass in a tight embrace. Roger exchanged a few words with Angelina, shook her hand, and then returned to his team, who patted him on the back. It took a while to file out of the stands, and Harry and Neville headed up to the castle with Parvati and Lavender, all 4 of them beaming. "Did you see Umbridge's face?" Lavender exclaimed with delight. The headmistress had looked outraged that even her attempts to ban 3 players couldn't stop the Gryffindor team from winning. Harry thought he'd seen Colin snap a picture of that expression, and he made a mental note to track down the 4th year and see about getting a copy. Harry needed to send a copy to Fred and George. Speaking of them, he urged, "You guys head up first." Once they reached the entrance hall, he added, "I've got to sort something out." Neville shot him a knowing glance, but chose not to press further, walking with the girls toward the stairs. Harry turned toward the corridor leading to the kitchens. The twins usually took charge of the incredible feasts at Gryffindor victory parties, and now it was up to him to step in. Fortunately, Dobby was eager to help. "We is taking care of it," the elf exclaimed, giving an enthusiastic salute. Several other house elves beamed up at Harry, bustling to fill a picnic basket with enough food to feed an army. "Brilliant. Thank you all so much. Could you just send it up to the tower?" Harry asked, knowing he had another stop to make. After hugging Dobby goodbye, he continued on his way, sneaking past the one-eyed witch and down to Hogsmeade. Madame Rosmerta looked only half surprised to see him, raising an amused eyebrow. "Gryffindor won, then," she guessed, and Harry nodded in response. "I'll take as much as you're willing to give me," he declared, placing a stack of galleons on the table. The barmaid laughed. "It was getting far too quiet without those Weasley boys around," she remarked, levitating a crate of butterbeer with her wand. "Glad you're picking up their legacy, Mr. Potter." Harry shrank the crate and carefully tucked it into his pocket before disappearing again, racing through Honeyduke's cellar and back to the castle. By the time he reached the tower, the party was already in full swing, though the Quidditch team hadn't arrived yet. Someone had hung a "Go, Go, Gryffindor" banner on the wall, and the picnic basket had been unpacked onto a conjured table. A cheer erupted as Harry revealed his purchase, enlarging the butterbeer crate and placing it in its usual spot. He grabbed a finger sandwich off the table, thinking, "I don't want to know how." "You managed that, did you?" Neville asked wryly as he accepted a bottle. Harry beamed at him. "Ask me no questions." "You'll tell me no lies, right?" Neville finished, rolling his eyes. Just then, the portrait hole swung open, and a roar of cheering filled the room as the Quidditch team burst in, clad in Gryffindor house hoodies and grinning from ear to ear. Harry whooped with excitement, especially when his gaze met Angelina's. He was thrilled she could experience winning the cup one last time. Ginny strode towards them, a determined glint in her eye. Harry was about to ask what was up when she stepped up to Neville, grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him down into a kiss. For a brief moment Neville froze, But then he wrapped his arms around the redhead, butterbeer bottle still in hand, and kissed her back as if there were no tomorrow. Harry laughed and wolf-whistled loudly, prompting another round of cheers, catcalls, and whistles from their friends. Across the room, he spotted a red-faced Ron gearing up to join them, only for Hermione to grab him by the arm and start yelling at him. Good. Ginny and Neville deserved this moment. When they finally broke apart for air, both were grinning like fools, and Harry clapped them on the shoulders like a proud parent. "About time, I say," he declared emphatically, making them both blush. We're going to go talk somewhere quieter," Neville stammered, his cheeks as red as the Gryffindor banner, though he held Ginny's hand tightly. "No worries. Here, take these with you." Harry handed Ginny a butterbeer and Neville a napkin stacked with chocolate chip scones. "They might all be gone by the time you get back. Also, fantastic catch, Ginny," he added, making her beam even wider. "Thanks, Harry. I hope you're ready to have me at Chaser tryouts next year," she replied, patting him on the back. He ruffled her hair. "You're on. Now get out of here, lovebirds." The only reason neither of them flipped him off was that their hands were full, but Ginny's glare said it all. Harry watched them leave with a fond smile, then scanned the crowd for the 3 Chaser girls, eager to hug them tightly in celebration of their victory, likely making Angelina and Alicia cry again in the process. He might not have played in this match, but he would always be a part of their team. Listening to his little cousin's increasingly worried report, Sirius frowned. It certainly sounded like things at the Ministry were going downhill fast. "How long do we think it will be before there's a vote of no confidence?" Bill asked. Kingsley shook his head. "There are too many people who are happy to let him keep blundering through," he pointed out. "Something big would have to happen first." None of them said what they were all thinking. Voldemort would have to rear his ugly head. In Sirius' opinion, it was even more concerning that the Dark Lord hadn't made any obvious moves since the breakout from Azkaban. Either his 10 Death Eaters were in worse shape than he'd thought, or he was taking advantage of being presumed dead to work under the radar and set something significant in motion. The initial surge of belief sparked by Harry's Quibbler article had gradually faded, worn down by the lack of activity and the Prophet's relentless insistence that it was all lies. "It's bloody frustrating," Tonks growled, running a hand through his bright orange hair. "There's nothing we can do but sit back and watch as more and more departments are headed by obvious Death Eaters, or at least by Death Eater sympathizers." Kingsley squeezed his partner's shoulder. "We can keep the Aurors legitimate for as long as possible. Scrimger may be a bastard, but he's an honest one." Sirius remembered Scrimger, a senior Auror back in the day, gruff and a little too rough with the suspects, always quick to accuse people of dark magic. He was cut from the same cloth as Alastair Moody, which wasn't ideal, but it was certainly better than having a Voldemort supporter in charge. Tonks sighed and shook his head. "You're right, as always," he added, trying to look mockingly annoyed. Kingsley smirked. "We should get going. I've got to be at work in an hour." That seemed to signal the end of their impromptu lunch meeting. Sirius began clearing the table, and he smiled when a familiar scarred hand reached for one of the plates. "You don't have to be anywhere?" he asked. Charlie shook his head and sent the dishes into the sink with a flick of his wand, then pulled Sirius in by the hand. "Not until 5, he replied, leaning in to kiss him slowly. Sirius still felt giddy, even more than a month into their relationship. After all those months of denying his feelings, it felt like he and Charlie had been together for much longer. But this was so much better than the way things had been before. "That's good," he said, leaning into Charlie's embrace and relishing how warm the dragon tamer always was. Sirius hardly ever felt cold these days, thanks to him. Want to come read in my room for a bit?" "Read or read?" Charlie asked, wiggling his eyebrows. Sirius snorted. "Actually read," he clarified. "I could use some company today." "I'm all yours," Charlie promised, kissing his cheek, completely unaware of how that made Sirius's heart skip with joy. They cleaned up the kitchen and wandered up to Sirius's room, shedding their jeans and shirts before climbing into bed in just their underwear. There were 2 books on the nightstand, and Charlie reached for them with his long arm, passing one to Sirius. Sirius wasn't sure he'd ever get used to the freedom of so much skin-on-skin contact. Charlie was comfortable being naked, or nearly so, even if they weren't going to. Charlie had no intention of doing anything sexual. He simply wanted to lie there and read with Sirius in his arms, one hand gently stroking Sirius's chest and belly, as if he were petting Padfoot instead of the very human Sirius. It was the best feeling in the world. "Hey, can I tell you a secret?" Charlie asked after they had been reading in silence for a little while. Sirius set his book down and replied, "What's up?" Charlie nuzzled against Sirius's temple, his hand on Sirius's stomach, pausing its movements. "Bill wants to ask Fleur to marry him." "Really?" Sirius grinned. "That's brilliant." Although he had never met the French witch, everything he'd heard from both the Weasleys and Harry painted her as a spitfire, perfect for Bill. "That is brilliant, isn't it?" "Yeah, she's great. I'd love to have her in the family," Charlie assured quickly. "But they want a longer engagement since they've only been together for about a year. So he's thinking of asking her to marry him, and if she says yes, she'll move into his flat with him. Gringotts doesn't care about cohabiting before marriage or anything like that." Sirius could see where Charlie's dilemma lay. "And you don't want to third-wheel your big brother and his future spouse?" he asked knowingly. Charlie nodded. "He said I can stay as long as I like, and it's not like Fleur would really mind, but they should have their privacy, you know? They need to figure out how to live together as a couple before they get married, without me being there." He sighed. "I'm fine with moving into reserve housing, I suppose. It'll just be a pain to travel to and from because of the wards." Sirius knew the wards on the Dragon Reserve were incredibly tight, with limited access points to ensure that none of the dragons got out, and that only authorized individuals could get in. "Why don't you move in here?" he suggested, almost without thinking. He felt Charlie tense at the suggestion. "I'm serious," Sirius said, the idea sounding better the more he considered it. "It's safe. You're right here for order meetings, and you can come and go as you please. Plus, I'm here too." A flutter of excitement stirred in his belly at the thought of having Charlie warm and heavy in his bed every night. He felt Charlie's lips curve into a smile against his temple. "6 weeks ago, you wouldn't even admit you liked me," Charlie pointed out. "6 weeks ago, I was an idiot," Sirius replied, turning to shift on Charlie's broad chest to look him in the eye. "If you don't want to, forget I asked. Or if you want to move into one of the guest rooms, that's totally fine. I'm not going to tie you to my bed," he teased, watching as Charlie's blue eyes lit up playfully. "Shame," Charlie drawled. "It just seems silly for you to get a flat at the reserve when you're always either here or at Bill's when you're not at work," Sirius pointed out. "And I know you hate living alone." He understood Charlie's discomfort. As one of 7 siblings, Charlie had shared with Sirius that being in an empty house felt unnerving. Back in Romania, he had lived with 2 housemates in a small 2-bedroom cabin on the reserve. Charlie let out a long breath. "Are you sure?" he asked, worry creeping into his voice. "I don't want to rush things. I don't want to overwhelm you." "I'd love to have you around all the time," Sirius replied earnestly. In all honesty, he couldn't think of anything better, except perhaps having Harry home. Charlie was the perfect companion. He knew when to be quiet and read versus when Sirius needed conversation, laughter, and music. He was happy to give Sirius his space when he needed it, but always seemed to sense when Sirius was slipping into dark thoughts. And, Sirius thought with a blush, he was an incredible lover, which certainly didn't hurt things. He set his book aside and leaned closer, ready to share more. Sirius cupped Charlie's face and said softly, "I know it took me a while to come around to this, but it's not because I don't care about you." If anything, it was because he cared too much. He wanted Charlie to have better than some messed-up ex-convict. "I don't think having you move in will overwhelm me, except in the good ways," he added with a wink. "Hell, it's a big enough house. If I need to avoid you, I can always find a way." Charlie snickered and then rolled them over, trapping Sirius gently against the mattress. "You're not wrong," he mused. Sirius hummed absently. It was always a little harder to think with Charlie's weight on top of him, his mind turning into a happy puddle of goo. Sometimes he wondered if Charlie did it just to get an honest answer out of him when he didn't have the brain power to lie. "You really want me to move in here?" Charlie asked. "I really do," Sirius assured him, his eyes falling half shut. "I want you here, all the time." He clenched his jaw to keep from saying something foolish. Charlie kissed the corner of his mouth. "Okay then. When Bill proposes and Fleur says yes, I'll move my stuff over here." There was no doubt in Charlie's voice that the French girl would accept the proposal. "You do know that me moving in here means my parents will probably find out eventually," the redhead added. Sirius groaned quietly. "I mean, we could try to fool them, but we'd probably slip up eventually." "Forget it," Sirius murmured. "Let them find out. I don't care. Give Molly another reason to hate me." "Mum doesn't hate you," Charlie replied, and Sirius snorted. "She does," he insisted. "She thinks I'm a reprobate. It'll be worse when she finds out I'm with her son." He grinned at the thought. "Okay, I need you clear-headed," Charlie declared. With another quick kiss, he rolled off of Sirius, leaving the older man pouting. "Do you mean it?" "It's not about Mum hating you. It's about whether you mind if she and Dad know," Sirius said, trying his best to maintain a serious expression as he sat up. "They'll find out sooner or later. It's going to turn into an argument, whether it happens now or 6 months down the line." "We might as well get it over with." He grinned ruefully. "You spent this long wearing me down. It's not like a disagreement with your parents will be enough to break us." He wouldn't have given in if he wasn't at least hoping for the long haul. "I just want to tell Harry first," he added, frowning. "I don't want him thinking I'm keeping secrets." Charlie's eyes sparkled in the lamplight. "Of course, yeah," he agreed. The dimples returned, and this time Sirius couldn't resist reaching for them, sliding his thumbs into the little divots. Charlie laughed, leaning in for a kiss. "I'm so happy you said yes," he sighed. "Sometimes I still can't believe it." A wave of guilt twisted in Sirius's gut. "I'm sorry I made you wait so long." "Totally worth it," Charlie insisted without hesitation. Sirius stole another kiss, leaning over the redhead, marveling at how he got so incredibly lucky that someone like Charlie Weasley was willing to give him the time of day. "You need to leave for work soon," he said, glancing at the clock on the wall. "How about I give you a little goodbye before you go?" Charlie's eyes darkened with desire. "An offer like that? How can I refuse?" Yes, Sirius thought, he would definitely love having Charlie in the house all the time. Chapter 70. Looking around the Chamber of Secrets at the gathered teenagers casting spells with increasing fervour, Harry felt a quiet sense of relief that this would be the last time he had to do it. Teaching had been enjoyable, but sneaking everyone in and out of the chamber once a week was exhausting. There was so much more at stake if he got caught this time compared to when they used the room of requirements. With exams fast approaching, they were holding one last session to address any concerns. Harry let the session continue until about half an hour before curfew, wanting to ensure everyone had enough time to return to their common rooms safely. "Before we all go," he said, rummaging through his bag, "I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to burn the contract." He pulled it out, holding it up for everyone to see. Several people gasped. "What? Why?" "The last thing I want is for any of you to be asked about learning a spell during your exam and accidentally trigger the contract, wiping your memories right in the middle of your practical," Harry explained. Many faces went pale at the thought. "If I burn it, the magic will end. By now I think I can trust all of you not to say anything. With any luck, by summer it wouldn't matter." He smirked and added, "Besides, if any of you told someone that I was sneaking you into the Chamber of Secrets to practice spells, they'd never believe you." Laughter erupted, turning into cheers as Harry lit the contract on fire, watching the parchment turn to ash before him. "No matter what happens in your exams, I'm proud of each and every one of you," he declared firmly. "And I sincerely hope you never have to use what you've learned this year in the real world, but I'm glad you know it, just in case." To his embarrassment, Ginny started a cheer for Harry, thanking him for teaching them in the first place. He blushed, hurrying over to open the passage that would take them back up to the library. "Let's just get out of here," he muttered bashfully. Once safely back in Gryffindor Tower, Harry made his excuses and headed up to his dorm, planning to call Sirius. He hadn't spoken to his godfather in a little while, and he knew he probably wouldn't get the chance once exams began. "Hey, Padfoot," he greeted, and Sirius grinned back at him. "Hi, pup. How are you doing? All ready for exams?" "I think so." Harry felt confident overall, though there were a few things he wanted to go over. "I'm going to study runes and arithmancy with Draco this weekend, just to make sure I'm up to standard." Remus and Sirius had taught him well, but it had been 20 years since they had taken their exams, and Harry wanted to be absolutely sure he hadn't missed anything on the curriculum. "Good lad," Sirius approved, then smirked. "Just don't get too sidetracked, yeah?" He wiggled his eyebrows, but Harry rolled his eyes. "As if Draco would let me. He's in study mode now, it's all business." There was a hint of annoyance in his tone, but he couldn't help it. His boyfriend wouldn't allow anything more than light kissing, not wanting to be distracted so close to such important exams. Though he had promised something great to make it up to Harry afterward. But Sirius didn't need to know that. They chatted about inconsequential things, but Harry slowly began to notice that his godfather seemed out of sorts. "Is everything all right, Sirius?" Sirius blinked, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "What? Yeah, I need to tell you something, actually." Cold fear gripped Harry. "Who's been hurt? Is it Voldemort?" Sirius's eyes widened. "What? No, nothing like that," he assured quickly, and Harry slumped in relief. "I probably should have prefaced that it's nothing serious." "Life-threatening or alarming," Harry said, trying to calm his racing heart. "Yeah, probably." "What's up then?" Sirius bit his lip, and Harry watched him, puzzled. What could be so difficult to say? "Well, see, it's like this," Sirius began hesitantly. "You might hear something from someone else, and I want to make sure you know before any rumors get to you. I'm not trying to keep secrets. It's just that you've had a lot on your plate lately, and I didn't want to add to that with my drama, mundane though it may be. But things are changing, and I don't want you thinking I was trying to hide it from you." "Padfoot, just spit it out," Harry urged, wondering what could have his godfather so tied up in knots. "I'm dating Charlie," Sirius blurted out. Harry blinked, and then blinked again. "Charlie Weasley?" he echoed. Sirius nodded. "Oh, wow. Okay then. That was unexpected. And that's a new thing then?" "Sort of. Not really. It's complicated." Sirius ran a hand through his hair. "But for various secret reasons I can't tell you yet, he might end up moving in with me here at Grimmauld. That means Molly will probably find out soon, and I wanted you to know before she does." He grimaced ruefully. "So that when you start to hear about how I've corrupted and defiled her precious baby boy, you know what it's about." "God, yeah. That is not going to be pretty when she hears about it," Harry said with a wince. "But he's at the stage of moving in already." How long had that been going on? Harry raked back through his memories over Christmas, and suddenly certain things were making a lot more sense. You say complicated. You're happy, right?" The blinding force of Sirius's grin felt like a punch to the chest. "So happy, pup," he assured. "Charlie, he's brilliant, really." "Charlie's great," Harry said, genuinely fond of the dragon tamer. He just hadn't expected the redhead to start dating his godfather. "Blimey, if only I'd known this would happen when I asked him to keep an eye on you," he muttered to himself. Then again, thinking back to Bill's reaction to that request, maybe he should have seen it coming. "What?" "Nothing," Harry quickly dismissed. "You know I'm going to want the full story, right? All the complicated bits and everything." He paused, making a face. "But none of the corruption and defiling, please, if you don't mind." He might have had a fleeting crush on Charlie once, and Sirius was certainly attractive, but they were family, and he didn't need those mental images, thank you very much. Sirius's cheeks flushed, though he continued to grin. "I'll tell you all about it after your exams," he promised. "Deal." Then Harry smirked, channeling his inner marauder. "You're in for so much teasing, after all the trouble you gave me about Draco." "But, Pup, I'm your godfather," Sirius exclaimed indignantly, making Harry laugh. "Exactly. It's a godson's prerogative to be a little troublemaker," he retorted gleefully, "especially since it's Charlie. You've got yourself a handsome boy toy, haven't you?" The blush on Sirius's face deepened. "You think my boyfriend's handsome?" he asked, almost shyly. Harry raised an eyebrow. "I have eyes," he pointed out dryly, "and it is very weird to hear you call Charlie your boyfriend. But in a good way," he added hastily, as he noticed Sirius's expression begin to falter. "It's good. A surprise, but good. You didn't seem like you wanted to date again for a long time." Every time Harry had brought it up, even jokingly, Sirius had changed the subject. The animagus let out a slow breath. "I didn't really. That's why it got complicated and why it took so long to figure things out. But I'm glad Charlie talked me round." Harry felt a strong urge to hear the whole story, but Sirius was right. They didn't have time for that right now. "Well, I'm happy for you," he declared with a grin, "and for Charlie. I'll be even happier when I'm home and can tease you both, but this will do for now." He winked, and Sirius let out a hearty laugh. "Will he come home with us, to Serendu?" Harry wondered aloud. Would he even get to go to Serendu this summer, or would he be sent straight to Grimmauld? Sirius ran a hand through his hair, shrugging. "Honestly, pup, who knows what's happening this summer? We'll get there when we get there. but considering Molly might be ready to murder me once she finds out, I'd say there's a good chance Charlie will come to Serendu with us." "Fair point," Harry agreed, smirking. "Well, the more the merrier. Having Charlie around would be great. At least he would have someone who could challenge him in a game of Seeker, aside from Draco's birthday visits. Plus, anyone who could put that smile on Sirius's face was someone Harry wanted around as much as possible. Finally, the time had come. The owls were upon them. In the days leading up to the exams, Harry largely kept to himself. Everyone was under immense stress, quick to snap at the slightest provocation, especially in Gryffindor, with all those volatile tempers. Hermione had developed a reputation for hexing anyone who interrupted her revision time, when she wasn't busy confiscating every fake brain elixir and concentration booster that made its way around the school. Harry couldn't help but wonder why Umbridge seemed so intent on reading mail in search of Dumbledore, yet didn't care about the banned substances sneaking in before the exams. Clearly, the Ministry's priorities were incredibly narrow. On Sunday afternoon, the examiners arrived. There were only a handful of them. Harry had expected more, considering they had both OWL and NEWT students to examine. But he supposed many students had dropped out. There were usually quite a few subjects at NEWT level, so the number of exams was fewer to handle individually. The scheduling felt a bit brutal to Harry, but who was he to judge? As long as he got to take his exams, he would be satisfied. "You ready for this, then?" he asked Neville on Monday morning, as they forced down as much breakfast as they could manage. Neville shrugged. "Have to be, don't we?" he replied wryly. "I think I'm all right, though." Since getting his new wand, Neville's spellcasting had improved tremendously, and Harry was glad to see his friend's confidence rising. He hoped the exam results would show Neville that he wasn't nearly as incapable as he believed. "Good luck, boys," Ginny said when it was time for her to head to class. She kissed Harry on the cheek and then gave Neville a proper kiss on the lips, leaving him flushed and smiling. "You'll do great." "Thanks, Gin," Harry replied, noticing that Neville seemed a bit too dazed to respond. The pair had been an official couple since the Quidditch match and were still firmly in the honeymoon phase, gazing at each other dreamily and holding hands whenever they could. It was adorable, and Harry wondered if part of the reason they were so sappy was that the twins were no longer around to tease Ginny about it. Either way, he was glad to see them happy together after so long of dancing around each other. The 5th and 7th years were sent out to wait in the entrance hall while the Great Hall was prepared for exams. Finally, they were directed into the hall to take their charms exams, each assigned to a single desk marked with names in alphabetical order. Harry gave Neville a brief squeeze on the shoulder before moving to sit at his desk between Sally Ann Perks and Oliver Rivers from Hufflepuff. All the 7th years were seated at the back of the hall with their Newt papers. As he waited, he watched the examiners stroll the room. As Harry walked down the aisles to double-check that no one was trying to hide any contraband, a sudden wave of fear washed over him. Had he really forgotten everything he had ever learned in charms? But then he was given permission to turn over his paper. He skimmed his eyes over the first few questions and couldn't help but grin to himself. This wasn't so bad after all. The charms practical in the afternoon went as smoothly as he had hoped the theory would in the morning. They were called up in groups of 4 and sent to the nearest available examiner. This meant that as Harry was starting his exam, Draco was just finishing his. Harry tried not to watch too closely, but pride swelled in his chest as Draco offered a small bow to Professor Marchbanks, who congratulated him on his performance. "I think the rest will be less scary now that we know what they're like," Neville said to Ginny that evening in the common room. All the 5th and 7th years were gathered, trying to cram as much last-minute transfiguration knowledge into their heads as possible. It was a point of pride for Gryffindor House, being their house mistress's subject, and no one wanted to let her down by doing anything less than their best. Some of the 4th and 6th years, along with friends or partners taking exams, like Ginny, had volunteered to be quizmasters, firing off questions from textbooks or handwritten revision cards. On Wednesday, it was Neville's time to shine with their herbology exams. As they waited in the entrance hall before the written exam, Neville was peppered with questions from students of all houses, and even a few Newt students. Harry imagined it was a relief for Neville when they were finally called in to sit at their desks. The next day, Harry got to experience exactly what it was like for Neville, as it was time for defense against the dark arts. "Harry, remind me which spells can't be blocked by Protego?" one student asked. "Help! I've forgotten all the things you need to subdue a red cap," another exclaimed. "Can you go over the counter to the—" "Jelly legs, Jinx, one more time, Harry." He almost shouted with joy when the doors opened, but the excitement quickly turned to silence as everyone filed into the hall. Harry did his best to offer a reassuring smile to every member of the Harry's army. They all knew their stuff. They would be fine, he hoped. As he breezed through the paper, he found himself enjoying the opportunity to go into more detail on some subjects than the examiners might expect. When he dared to glance around the hall, he noticed plenty of his friends looking calm and focused, writing furiously. Then there was Hermione Granger, biting her fingernails and already requesting extra parchment for the 3rd time, just as she had in both previous exams. Was she even making it to the end of the questions with all that over-answering? It would be interesting to see her results. What he was really looking forward to was the defense against the dark arts practical. Well, as much as one could look forward to an exam, at least. A sense of pride washed over him as he watched Parvati and Padma perform exemplary stunning and disarming charms during their exams. As Harry went through each spell as instructed, he noticed Professor Tofty's bushy eyebrows rising higher and higher, clearly impressed. It was even better to see Umbridge watching with barely concealed anger as the students she had kept from performing magic all year displayed their spells with impressive accuracy. "Well done, Mr. Potter," Tofty exclaimed, delight lighting up his face. "Now that's everything I need to see from you. However," he leaned in a little closer, "I've heard through the rumour mill that you, Mr. Potter, can produce a Patronus. Perhaps for a bonus point?" He trailed off, clearly hopeful. Harry grinned and raised his wand. "Expecto Patronum!" The room fell silent as a huge silver stag galloped around, leaving everyone in astonishment. Other members of Harry's army might be able to conjure a Patronus, but none of them were as solid and impressive as his. And none of them would likely be asked to perform it in their exam. If looks could kill, Harry would have dropped dead from the glare. Umbridge shot him a disapproving look as he made his way out, but Harry couldn't help but smile extra wide at her. Friday was finally here, the day he had been quietly anticipating, the Ancient Runes exam. There was only one written test, no practical component, and the afternoon would be filled with the Muggle Studies exam. As breakfast ended, students who hadn't chosen runes as an elective eagerly left the hall, ready for a day of relaxation or more revision for the upcoming tests. Harry lingered with a small group of runes students, his hands tucked into his pockets as he mentally reviewed his notes. It took several minutes for Hermione to notice him. "Harry, what are you doing?" she asked, a hint of annoyance in her voice. He shrugged. "Waiting for the exam." "But you don't take ancient runes," she replied, sounding incredulous. Harry nodded. I know. I've self-studied. The idea seemed to outrage her. Just as she was gearing up for what would undoubtedly be an impressive rant, the door swung open. Professor Marchbanks, Hermione called out, spinning around. Harry says he's taking the exam, but he's not in the Ancient Runes class. He can't do that. You have to tell him he's got it wrong. Professor Marchbanks frowned slightly and glanced down at the parchment in her hand, her gnarled finger trailing down the list of names. Potter. Yes, there he is. Potter. Harry. He registered his intent with the ministry, young lady. He has as much right to this exam as you do. Come on, in you go, all of you. But that's not fair. He isn't in the class, Hermione protested, but no one paid her any mind as they filed past her into the hall. As Harry walked by, she grabbed his sleeve. You're going to fail, Harry. You shouldn't do this. It'll look bad on your record. I think that's my problem, not yours, don't you? He replied calmly, pulling his sleeve free and continuing on to his desk. It was incredibly satisfying for Harry to watch Hermione try to glance back at him without getting scolded by the examiners. He could almost see the expectation on her face that he would be staring blankly at his paper or having a breakdown over all the things he didn't know. But, on the contrary, Harry felt fairly confident about how he had performed in the exam. With Remus and all his friends helping him, and Draco, of course, he faced no surprises on the paper. Hermione was probably going to regret focusing more on his progress than her own. As he left the exam, a smile spread across his face, which only widened when he caught sight of Hermione glaring at him before storming off. "Oh, you've upset her, haven't you?" Blaise remarked, amusement dancing in his voice as he and Daphne joined Harry. You'd think that with all her supreme knowledge, she'd have learned it's fairly common for students to self-study for elective exams. Harry knew there were at least 10 Muggle-born and Muggle-raised students signed up for the Muggle Studies exam, just aiming for an easy outstanding, despite never having taken the class. He had thought about it himself, but ultimately couldn't be bothered. One day she'll realize she can only control her own education, not everyone else's, Harry said. Daphne laughed. She hasn't even been controlling her own very well. You should have seen her in her defense practical. Some of the shakiest wand work I've seen in ages. Harry felt a tiny pang of regret, but he quickly pushed it away. It wasn't his fault Hermione hadn't been trustworthy enough to invite to the study group. It wasn't his responsibility to educate all his classmates. She was perfectly capable of practicing the spells in secret, just like everyone else at the school, not just the ones he was teaching. But Hermione had always excelled more in theory than in practice. Spells, especially combat spells, were often about intuition, and she struggled with the kind of fluidity that couldn't be found in a textbook. His thoughts were interrupted by Luna skipping toward them, her enthusiasm infectious. Luna stood on her toes to press a kiss to Daphne's lips. "Your exams went well," she said, making it a statement rather than a question. Daphne smiled. At least, it was the closest she got to smiling in public. "Did they? Oh, good." In Luna's wake came Ginny and Neville, hand in hand. "Great, you're all done." "I'm starving," Ginny declared, nudging Harry toward the doors as they reopened, revealing the hall set for lunch once more. With Umbridge's ridiculous educational decree in place, they couldn't all sit together, so they bid farewell to their Slytherin friends and found a spot where Luna could sit with Ravenclaw while still being within conversation distance of the Gryffindors at their own table. "I'm not letting you spend all weekend with your head buried in potions books, Neville," Ginny insisted, happily scooting up the table to make room for Parvati and Lavender on her other side. "Oh, Neville, don't torture yourself like that," Parvati agreed. "Your brain needs to rest." "We'll be doing a bit of divination revision tomorrow afternoon, though, if you both want to join us," she added. "That would be perfect, thanks," Harry said. It was solely thanks to the two girls that he thought he might actually get a decent passing grade in the subject. Harry did manage to do some revision over the weekend, although he wasn't hitting the books as hard as some of his classmates. Incredibly, he managed to persuade Draco to sneak away with him to the chamber on Sunday morning, cuddling up to the blonde on their conjured sofa. "If you don't know it now, you never will," Harry insisted, wandlessly banishing Draco's arithmancy book across the room. "Easy for you to say, Mr. Powerhouse," Draco groused, watching his book fly away. Harry smirked, kissing him chastely. "You're the brainiac of the two of us, and we both know it. I've just got enough raw magic to get away with being a bit sloppy." Draco raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but if you're trying to call me a nerd, I'll have to insist on holding up a mirror," Draco retorted. "You started doing rune circles for fun the other week." "It was more fun than memorizing potion ingredients," Harry shot back. He shook his head. "Look, never mind. I don't want to spend the next hour arguing with you," he added, knowing they both usually enjoyed their debates. "Come on, lie down with me. You haven't been sleeping," he said, his tone knowing. He could see the dark circles beneath Draco's eyes, no matter how many face creams and glamour charms the Slytherin used. "I'm fine," Draco insisted, but he let Harry guide him down onto the sofa, settling comfortably between Harry's body and the back cushions. I really need to do well in these exams," Draco admitted. "You will," Harry assured him, pressing a gentle kiss to his temple and tangling their legs together. "You'll do brilliantly. Your mum will be prouder than ever, and your father can go screw himself regardless." Draco snorted, arching his neck for another kiss. "No manners in you," he teased, a smirk playing on his lips. "None at all," Harry agreed with a grin. "But I'm right, and we both know it. So just relax and take a nap with me. I've set an alarm on my wand to wake us for lunch." Draco murmured, though Harry could already feel him relaxing, inch by inch. "I suppose we can take a short break. I have all afternoon to study with Theo and the girls, after all." "Exactly." Harry nestled his face into the warm hollow of Draco's neck, inhaling the faintly spicy scent of the boy's aftershave. Not that Draco needed to shave often, with his baby face and pale blonde hair. Unlike Harry, whose chin fuzz needed taming at least 3 times a week to avoid embarrassingly patchy scruff. "Do you know what you're doing for the summer yet?" Draco asked quietly. Harry hummed. Not a clue. They were mostly waiting to see what would unfold. Harry asked, "Have you convinced your mum to move to Serendue yet?" Draco sighed. "I wrote to her, but Umbridge is screening even our mail these days. I'll try again when I get home." He ran his fingers gently through Harry's hair, stroking the base of his skull. It might be too dangerous to split so publicly from father like that. Harry countered, "No more dangerous than living with the Dark Lord in your house. Besides, with any luck, I'll be at Serendue too. Don't you want to spend your summer with me?" Draco's expression softened. That is a tempting prospect. He tilted his head slightly, his lips brushing against Harry's. "I'll try. That's all I can promise." Harry made a vague noise of agreement, his mind already racing with the idea of having Draco live with him all summer. They could play Quidditch together, swim in the pool, and explore all those hidden corners of the manor where they could escape their guardians and enjoy each other's company. After dating for so long, he doubted their guardians would truly mind what they got up to in their bedrooms. After all, no one could accidentally become pregnant. The thought of being with Draco in that way sent warmth through Harry. They hadn't gone that far yet, content with exploring each other's hands and mouths. But fingers had been wandering more often, and with a whole summer ahead of them, they might finally have the time to explore further. "Whatever you're thinking about, stop it," Draco drawled, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I can feel you getting hard. This is supposed to be nap time, you randy bastard." "Sorry," Harry replied, unrepentant, as he pressed a kiss to Draco's neck. "Saving it all for after exams, yeah?" It was getting a bit frustrating having to deal with his teenage libido every night, especially after just watching Draco across the Great Hall. But if Draco needed to focus on his exams without the distraction of sex, then... Harry nodded in agreement. Draco mused, sounding contemplative. "I suppose we're halfway through, and it is supposed to be good for stress relief." Harry tried to keep his hopes in check, but the heat pooling in his stomach had other plans. Draco's hand slid down to his backside, giving it a squeeze. "Go on, then," he finally conceded, already shifting, and suddenly Harry could feel Draco's arousal as well. "What a shame we've already finished our transfiguration exam," Draco murmured, leaning in for a kiss. "This would have been great practice for vanishing spells." Harry smirked, grabbed his wand, and with a quick flick they were both entirely naked. "Let's call it early practice for newts," he suggested. Draco laughed, but it quickly turned into a moan, the sound sending a thrill straight to Harry's core. Yes, this was exactly what they both needed to power through their exams. As Harry walked out of his potions practical exam, he silently made a mental note to buy an enormous amount of chocolate for Remus Lupin at the earliest opportunity. If the werewolf hadn't been in love with Snape, then Snape wouldn't have been so willing to tutor Harry during the summers, and Harry wouldn't have performed nearly as well as he thought he had. He considered getting a gift for Snape as well, but he had already given the man the remains of a 60-foot basilisk and free access to Salazar Slytherin's private library. Those had to count as a preemptive thank you for the O he hoped he had achieved. He really wanted Snape to be proud of him, to see that his efforts had not gone to waste. "And now I never have to study potions again," Neville declared joyfully, causing Harry to chuckle. "Congrats," Harry said, clapping his friend on the back. "I bet you passed." Neville had begun to improve in potions once he learned to approach it from a herbology perspective, and he made far fewer mistakes when Snape wasn't in the room. "Honestly, I could have gotten a troll and I wouldn't have cared at this point. I'm just glad it's over." Tuesday's Care of Magical Creatures exam was one that nearly every student was determined to excel in, if only to spite Umbridge. She would revel in the thought of all of Hagrid's students failing, and they weren't about to give her that satisfaction. Wednesday proved to be the toughest exam day yet for Harry. He had divination in the morning, arithmancy in the afternoon, and then, at night, their astronomy exam. He added Parvati and lavender to his must-buy chocolate for list. The divination exam had been far less grueling than he'd anticipated, and he knew it was thanks to them. "Thank you, both of you," he said earnestly at lunch, and they giggled in response. "It's what friends are for," Parvati insisted. "I'm pretty sure I would have barely scraped an A in defense without you, so we'll call it even." Still, Harry planned to get them something nice. The crowd waiting for the arithmancy exam after lunch was much smaller than usual, with few students willing to tackle such a complex elective. Because of that, Hermione spotted Harry almost immediately. "No," she declared flatly, her eyes narrowing at him. You can't. This is arithmancy." Hermione was the only Gryffindor fifth year enrolled in arithmancy classes, and all weekend she had been snapping at anyone who suggested that the toughest exams were behind them. Of course, she believed arithmancy was going to be impossible. "Self-study," Harry explained with a shrug, hiding his smile behind a neutral facade. "Leave it, Granger," Anthony Goldstein interjected, rolling his eyes. "If Potter wants to fail exams, it's none of your business." But then, when Hermione wasn't looking, he winked at Harry. Anthony, along with Draco, had been Harry's main tutor in the subject during their school hours. He had even told Harry himself that he was capable of earning at least an E. Hermione glared at Harry, her frustration evident. Up until the examiners let them in, Harry glared at Marchbanks, hoping she would eject him from the hall. He desperately wanted to achieve Os in both runes and arithmancy, just to rub it in her self-righteous face. After dinner, some of the Gryffindors chose to revise for their astronomy exam, but Harry decided to take a nap instead. Sirius had quizzed him over the weekend. Apparently all Blacks excelled in astronomy, and he was determined to make sure Harry did too. After 2 challenging exam papers, Harry preferred to get some restful sleep before tackling another one. There were only so many constellation and moon names he could cram into his head. At 11 o'clock, the entire year group made their way up to the astronomy tower and set up their telescopes to observe the cloudless sky. It was a perfect night for stargazing. A full moon bathed them in bright silver light. Harry wondered if Remus had to take exams on full moon days. That sounded awful. Professor Marchbanks instructed them to begin, and Harry reached for the blank star chart he was meant to fill out, carefully angling his telescope. It was surprisingly peaceful up there, with only the rustle of parchment, the scratch of quills, and the occasional squeak of a telescope being adjusted. Harry felt he was doing quite well with his chart, until he noticed light spilling onto the lawn and several long shadows stretching across the grass. Curiosity piqued. He couldn't tear his eyes away from a group of 6 figures walking across the grounds. He recognized the leader's walk. It belonged to the shortest, stoutest member of the group. Dread filled his stomach. They were headed to Hagrid's hut. He tried to refocus on his star chart, which was 3/4 finished. He needed to complete it, even if he didn't have time to go back and double-check. Suddenly, he heard a faint knock, followed by the muffled barking of a dog. Pressing his face closer to the telescope, he blocked out the sounds from his surroundings. Harry turned his head, ignoring the light that flickered on in Hagrid's window. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed through the night air, drawing everyone's attention away from the starry sky and toward Hagrid's hut. Tofty and Marchbanks tried to keep the students focused on their exams, but even they were taken aback when spells began to fly. "Look!" Parvati squealed, pointing to another dark shadow moving toward the chaos from the castle doors. "How dare you!" the figure yelled in a familiar Scottish brogue. "How dare you!" McGonagall scolded the Aurors, brandishing her wand. But she was cut off mid-sentence as 4 bright red stunners struck her all at once. The impact blasted her backward, illuminating her for just a moment before she hit the ground hard and lay still. "Galloping gargoyles!" Tofty exclaimed, completely abandoning the exam. He sounded outraged, and Harry felt the same way, his heart racing as he watched Hagrid snap, his massive fists flying. Umbridge kept screaming at the Aurors, but they weren't foolish enough to engage in a physical fight with an angry half-giant. With fangs slung over his shoulders, Hagrid sprinted for the gates and disappeared into the night. A tense silence fell over the group. No one moved. Then Tofty coughed. 5 minutes left, everyone," he said. Harry glanced at his mostly full star chart, but his attention was primarily on McGonagall's unconscious form lying on the grass below. Umbridge walked right past her, and Harry felt a surge of hatred for the woman, magic bubbling in his palms. Oh, the spells he wished he could cast on that foul toad. At least the auras seemed to possess a shred of decency, or perhaps shame, as they huddled around McGonagall and carried her back up to the castle. Marchbanks called time, and Harry quickly handed over his star chart before hurrying down the tower steps. "Harry, where are you going?" Neville called, hurrying after him. Harry glanced back. "Hospital wing," he replied shortly, not slowing down. He needed to check if Professor McGonagall was all right, to see if the auras had really taken her for help. Some other Gryffindors clearly thought he had the right idea. Harry heard several sets of footsteps trailing behind him. He burst through the hospital wing doors, making Madame Pomfrey jump. "Potter! And good heavens!" she exclaimed, noticing the small crowd of students behind him. "It's 1:30 in the morning. What are you all doing out of bed?" "Is Professor McGonagall all right?" Harry asked urgently. "We saw the whole thing." "Astronomy exam," he explained. Pomfrey's mouth thinned severely. "She's stable for now, but I'm calling for a transfer to St. Mungo's first thing in the morning if she can handle the move," she said. Harry looked past her, seeing a bed with curtains drawn around it. 4 stunning spells right to the chest, at her age. She's lucky it didn't kill her. He heard 2 gasps behind him that sounded like Lavender and Parvati. "Will she be okay?" he asked, hating how his voice cracked slightly around the lump in his throat. Pomfrey's expression softened. "The healers will do everything they can," she promised, "and Minerva is nothing if not stubborn. There's plenty of life in her yet, I'd wager." It wasn't as reassuring as Harry would have liked. "What about the auras?" Ron asked loudly, and Pomfrey's eyes hardened once more. "They claimed it was self-defense and would not be facing charges," she said tersely. "But that's codswallop," Neville blurted. "You'd best not say such things where our head mistress can hear you, Mr. Longbottom," Pomfrey reprimanded, though the look on her face suggested she agreed with him. "Now, off to bed with you. You've got an exam tomorrow, all of you." The group of sombre Gryffindors made their way back to the common room, feeling defeated. It turned out that the entire fight had been visible from the tower, and the common room was packed with students in their pyjamas, all eager to hear what had happened. They recounted the events, finishing with the news that their head of house was in serious condition and being moved to the hospital. This revelation ignited tempers, and it wasn't until 4 in the morning that the common room finally emptied out. If Harry were Umbridge, he would be fearing for his life right about now. A tower full of furious Gryffindors was not a foe to take lightly. Just because 2 year groups hadn't finished their exams didn't mean that retribution wouldn't come. Ginny certainly had plenty of ideas about that. Harry slept through breakfast, taking advantage of Dobby's kindness to have bacon and eggs in his dorm around 10 o'clock. He had no desire to face the rest of the school and see Umbridge's smug face as she explained away Professor McGonagall's absence, as if the whole school wasn't aware of what really happened. He did venture down for lunch, though, and at 2 o'clock he and the other exam candidates filed into the Great Hall for their final OWL exam, History of Magic. Just by looking around, Harry could tell which students had chosen revision over sleep. It seemed particularly cruel to have exams the day after the late-night astronomy exam. Shouldn't they have waited until the end? If Harry had been writing the schedule, he certainly wouldn't have placed the most tedious subject at the very end, when everyone was too exhausted to care. Or perhaps that was the point. They knew no one really cared about their history of magic results, so they scheduled the exam last, allowing students to blame low grades on burnout rather than a lack of study or interest. Harry was definitely one of those students who couldn't have cared less, but he still tried his best. He wrote down everything he could remember, everything he had desperately crammed into his head during study sessions, because Binns was utterly useless. But it was clear he wasn't going to get. Harry hadn't gotten enough sleep, and a dull headache was starting to throb at his temples, blurring his vision. Gritting his teeth, he pushed through the discomfort. He just had to get through this one exam, and then he'd be done. After that, he could sleep for a week if he wanted. His thoughts came slowly, like trying to write through treacle. The constant scratch of quills around him grated on his sensitive ears, turning into a long, discordant hum that made his brain itch. He squeezed his eyes shut and buried his face in his hands for just a moment. "Concentrate, Potter," he told himself, trying to visualize the timeline he and Susan had worked on together. But his head throbbed harder, and his vision swam, so he closed his eyes again. Suddenly, he found himself in a long, dark, familiar corridor. Harry's heart sank. Oh, of course, it was that time of year again. He felt like a passenger in his own mind as he hurried down the corridor, passing through a door and into a circular room, then through another door into a space filled with bright, dancing lights. He pressed onward, with a destination in mind. Rows and rows of glass orbs, but he only needed one. At the end of the row, he saw a black mass, a figure slumped on the floor. Harry's own arm raised a wand, casting magic that made the man on the floor scream in pain. A scream he recognized all too well. Sirius Black lifted his head defiantly, spitting on the ground at Harry's, Voldemort's, feet, daring the Dark Lord to do his worst. Harry felt the pleasure that surged in Voldemort's chest. He relished making people scream. And scream Sirius did, his voice echoing in Harry's ears. But then another scream joined in. It was Harry himself, back in his own body. He jolted awake, falling out of his seat and onto the cold stone floor, still screaming, his scar burning. He gasped for breath and realized someone was standing over him. Professor Tofty, looking down at him with concern. "I'm fine," Harry rasped, his throat sore from screaming. "Really, my boy, I must insist you go to the hospital wing," the examiner pressed, helping Harry to his feet with surprising strength for such a frail frame. Harry looked around. The exam was still in progress, but everyone was staring at him. How long had he been screaming? How hard had they tried to snap him out of it? After the rumors that had circulated about him over the past 2 years, he was certain most of them could guess what had just happened, whether they believed it or not. He met Neville's worried gaze and quickly looked away. Tofty gently guided him toward the entrance hall, assuring him that exam pressure could happen to anyone. "If you have a drink of water and take a quiet sit-down, you might be able to go back in just to finish your last answer." "No, I've done all I can, thanks," Harry replied, his history grade the last thing on his mind. "I think I'm just going to go back to bed, if that's all right." Of course. I'll go collect your examination paper. I do hope you feel better, Mr. Potter." With a comforting pat on the arm, Tofty left him to it. As soon as the old man was gone, Harry sprinted for the stairs. He had a mirror to check. Chapter 71. Gryffindor Tower was silent when Harry entered. Those who weren't in the exam were either in class or studying elsewhere. He sprinted straight up to his dormitory, wrenching open his bedside drawer. "Sirius Black!" The few seconds it took for Sirius to answer the mirror felt like an eternity. Harry deflated in relief as his godfather's face appeared, frowning at him. Harry? What's wrong? Shouldn't you be in an exam? Immediately, Harry relayed the details of his vision. A trap, he now realized, a lure to draw him to the Ministry. They don't know I have the mirror, he pointed out. They think I can't contact you. Voldemort and his followers probably believed they were very clever, targeting Harry's most beloved person outside the castle, while all communication was monitored. A person who wouldn't be missed, who was meant to be hidden away, a person known for being reckless. The Order is out at the moment anyway, Sirius said grimly. There's a Death Eater raid on a Muggle village, likely timed deliberately just in case you could get a message to one of them to reach me. Harry's heart clenched. Yes, it had all worked out too well for them. Dumbledore was gone. McGonagall was unconscious in the hospital, and no other Order members were nearby. As always, their fatal flaw was underestimating Harry Potter. "What do we do?" he asked, and Sirius's frown deepened. "What do you mean? The vision was fake. There's nothing to do." "But they're expecting me," Harry retorted. "They'll be waiting for me. Voldemort will be waiting for me." His mind raced, drawing conclusions that sent chills down his spine. What if they're planning to take the Ministry tonight? It had been coming for a while. They all knew it. Killing two birds with one stone, distracting the Order with the raid, luring me in to take the prophecy, then they'll kill me, take the Ministry, and they've won. All the more reason for you to leave well alone. But can't we stop them? Harry urged. At least long enough for the Order to arrive, long enough for the Ministry to send backup and finally recognize what's been right in front of them this whole time. He couldn't shake the fear that it might be too late, that the Death Eaters could have already killed everyone and were just waiting for him. But surely the Order would have heard if such bloodshed had occurred. "You're 15, Sirius began, but Harry interrupted him. "You've been training me for situations just like this, and I can bring my own backup." He thought of his friends, those who might be willing to risk their lives alongside him. "I can feel it, Sirius. He's so determined." The emotions surging through his scar were too intense to be solely about the prophecy. "If we don't go and stop them tonight, they'll have taken the Ministry by morning." Fudge was weaker than ever, and the Aura department wasn't much better. It was nearly 5 in the afternoon. The Ministry would soon empty for the evening, and that's when the Death Eaters would strike. "Leave it to the Order." "The Order is busy. You said it yourself," Harry protested. "You'd better not be doing this just to hear that bloody prophecy for yourself," Sirius growled, and Harry shot him a glare. "It's not that. I don't need the prophecy. I'm already stuck in this mess." Unless it provided detailed instructions on how to find and destroy all of Voldemort's Horcruxes, he didn't care. And if it did, Dumbledore would have taken care of it himself. "Please, Sirius, we can't let them take the Ministry. It'll be all over if they do." Even if most of magical Britain stood against the dark, only a small fraction would have the courage to act. If Voldemort gained control of the legal system, he could easily silence any opposition. He had already shown he was willing to use the Imperious Curse on as many people as necessary to get the job done. Harry could see it in Sirius's eyes. Sirius could see the determination on his godfather's face, and he knew he was right. "I'll try to raise the alarm with the Order," he finally said. "We have time. Hopefully they'll be back before you can get to London." But if the raid was meant to keep the Order distracted and out of the way, Harry wasn't so sure about that. "Take your mirror with you," Sirius continued. "I'll call when backup is on the way." "Are you sure about this, pup?" "He's planning something big," Harry insisted, feeling it deep in his chest. Voldemort was far too pleased to be focused solely on the prophecy. Right. Damn. Sirius's grey eyes reflected his concern. Be careful, all right? You know he can't die yet. Harry nodded. I'm not looking to kill him. I just want to stop him from gaining the upper hand and take out as many of his followers as I can. Don't go alone. I won't. Harry wasn't sure who he would take, but he would figure it out. I love you. I love you too. I'll see you soon. Before Sirius could try to talk him out of it, Harry cut the connection. He sank onto his bed, running a hand through his hair. After taking a long, shaky breath, he squared his jaw and got to his feet. He had work to do. As soon as he stepped out of the portrait hole, Neville grabbed him. What? Nev, where are we going? Harry exclaimed, feeling a sense of urgency. Neville ignored him, dragging him down the corridor and into the room of requirement. Harry's jaw dropped at the sight of the entire group of heirs, plus Ginny. What the hell? What did you see, Harry? Ginny asked, her brown eyes focused intently on him. Harry was taken aback. You know I had a vision? Blaise scoffed. Please, everyone knows what it means when you start screaming and clawing at your scar like it's trying to murder you. What is it? What's he up to? Harry swallowed hard. He's planning to take the Ministry. Tonight, Harry said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. They didn't need to know about the false torture of Sirius. Gasps echoed around the room. There's something he wants there, something he needs me for, but I'm just the icing on the cake. He's been positioning his people, and with Dumbledore out of the way, he thinks he can take the Ministry tonight. So we're going to stop them, right? To Harry's surprise, it was Neville who spoke up, his hand tightly gripping his wand. I don't expect anyone to come with me, but I wouldn't say no to some assistance. Harry noticed the uneasy glances exchanged among several of the heirs. It was one thing to train for some vague future fight, and quite another to actively seek out Death Eaters. I should be getting backup, but I don't know how long it'll take them to be notified. Neville and Ginny exchanged a look before stepping forward. We're coming, Ginny declared, her expression daring him to argue. I'm coming too, Luna chimed in, kissing Daphne on the cheek and moving to stand beside Ginny. When Harry glanced at the rest of the group, he saw Draco step forward. No, Harry said immediately. I'm not letting you fight your father. For a moment, Draco looked like he might protest, but then his shoulders slumped. I want to keep you safe, you idiot. Harry reached for his hand. You can do that by staying here, where I won't have to worry about you. It was far too dangerous for Draco to risk being seen at his side. I'll keep him safe, Susan said, stepping forward with determination. If you'll have me, Harry. He grinned at her. She was fierce with a wand, and he wasn't about to turn that down. If Luna's going, I suppose I'm coming too, Daphne sighed. They're already after my uncle anyway. Can't make it much worse. Daphne, you don't have to, Harry protested. No, but I'm going to, the blonde girl insisted before he could argue further. Blaise needs to stay. He needs to be the approachable face for the neutral Slytherins. He can't be seen rushing into danger at Harry Potter's side. But I can. She smirked, and for a brief moment Harry felt pity for anyone who might end up on the other end of her wand that night. No one else in the room looked eager to volunteer, so Harry decided to relieve their discomfort before they felt pressured into stepping up. The rest of you need to stay here and keep Umbridge distracted, he instructed. She's going to raise hell once she realizes I'm gone, and if there's trouble at the Ministry, things could get messy. Dumbledore and McGonagall are both gone. The school is unprotected. Not with us around, it's not, Parvati replied, her Gryffindor spirit shining through. Harry felt a wave of relief. Between them and the DA, any real damage would surely be mitigated. He pushed aside the nagging worry that the Death Eaters might be planning a double attack on both the Ministry and Hogwarts while they were both vulnerable. They couldn't possibly have the numbers for that, at least not yet. Still holding Draco's hand, Harry pulled him aside, and everyone pretended not to notice them, just as they ignored Theo, who had his forehead pressed against Susan's, whispering to her earnestly. "Tell Snape where I'm going as soon as we've left," Harry whispered to Draco. "The order is elsewhere, but I've spoken to Sirius, and he's going to try to get in touch so they can follow." "That's relying on an awful lot of hope," Draco murmured. Harry just grinned and kissed him. "I'm Harry Potter. Blind hope tends to work out pretty well for me." Draco was not impressed, but he pulled Harry into a proper kiss, his tongue exploring Harry's mouth as if he never wanted to let go. But eventually they had to part, and Harry hugged him tightly. "I love you." "I love you too. Just don't do anything stupid." Draco's sharp glare cut off any cheeky retort Harry might have given. "And if my father is there, hex him for me, will you?" Harry snorted. "Will do." After one last kiss, he felt ready. He glanced back at his friends, and they looked prepared too. "Be safe, all of you," Blaise said, his dark eyes lingering on Daphne. "You too," Harry replied, aware that the castle wouldn't be a safe place once Umbridge caught wind of what was happening. "Right then, let's go." The six of them, Harry, Neville, Ginny, Luna, Daphne and Susan, hurried out of the room and down the corridor. "How are we getting to London?" Susan asked, and Harry grimaced. "I hadn't exactly figured that one out yet." He ducked into a side passage, waiting until everyone was inside with him. "Dobby." The elf appeared instantly, his green eyes as wide as ever. "How can Dobby help Harry Potter, sir?" "Dobby, I don't suppose you can take me and my friends to London, can you?" Harry asked hopefully. Dobby tugged at his ears, his face falling. "Elves is not able to remove students from within school wards. Dobby is sorry." He looked genuinely devastated, and Harry raised a hand to stop the elf from punishing himself. No, it's okay. It was a long shot. I suppose even Kerry couldn't either. It's not just school elves." Again Dobby shook his head. "Damn." Then he paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "What if we were already outside the school wards, say in Hogsmeade? Could you travel with us then?" Dobby frowned thoughtfully. "Dobby supposes it is not in the school rules, and there is no magic to stop it." Harry grinned, glancing up at his friends. "Sounds like that's the way to do it, then." Even if Dobby couldn't leave through his bonds as a Hogwarts house elf, Kerry absolutely could if Harry called her from outside the school wards. "But how are we going to get to Hogsmeade? Umbridge has people crawling all over the school. We'll never get past the gates," Daphne said, looking sceptical. Harry's grin widened. "Oh, that's not as difficult as you'd expect." He glanced at his watch. It had been an hour and a half since he'd had the vision during the exam. Voldemort would likely be expecting him to travel by broom or something equally reckless. He had mentioned they had hours before anyone would come to find Sirius. Before we go anywhere, though, we need a plan. Even though he was sneaking out of school with his friends to confront Death Eaters at the Ministry of Magic, he wasn't about to be reckless without at least a vague idea of what to do once they arrived. "Susan, what time does the Ministry close for the night?" "Most people are out by 6, she replied. "Some will stay in their offices until 7 or 8, but there aren't many these days. There's a night shift guard in the atrium, and I know the auras have an on-call rotation, but they usually only have 1 or 2 people manning the emergency flu line, and that's it. So the ministry was probably mostly empty by now. Harry would bet anything that most of those still at their desks were the ones planning to aid the Dark Lord in whatever way they could, even if it was just by keeping silent. "One thing I want to know, Harry," Ginny chimed in, "is what you-know-who wants from you in all of this. Considering how good you are at messing up his plans, surely he'd want to keep you out of the way." Harry's smile turned into a grim line. "Yes, but he also wants to kill me quite a lot," he said, and Daphne snorted. "He needs me to get something. From the Department of Mysteries. There's this prophecy, all right? About me and him, supposedly. He's heard the first half, but not the second, and he thinks it'll tell him how he can defeat me and live forever or something." "You really are the chosen one, then?" Daphne remarked dryly. "A prophecy is only as strong as those who believe in it," Luna said. "Often the damage done from hearing them is worse than the prophecy itself." "Yeah, well, the damage done from him hearing the first half led to my parents being targeted, and Neville's," Harry added, shooting an apologetic glance at his friend. Neville gaped. "Child born at the end of July. Look, it's not important." Harry shook his head, realizing he was getting off topic. "The point is, he expects me to meet him down in the Department of Mysteries, and I will. But not as blindly as he thinks, so let's make a plan." He wasn't great at this part. Even without the compulsions muddling his brain, his idea of a plan was simply to start with good intentions and figure the rest out as he went along. But now he had others with him, people whose safety depended on more than just luck and timing. He couldn't afford to lose any of them, not like he lost Cedric. So, planning it was. Luckily, his friends were much better at that than he was. With a plan in place, Harry and his friends hid themselves under disillusionment charms and made their way to the statue of the one-eyed witch. Harry had considered using the Shrieking Shack, but getting all 6 of them across the grounds unnoticed would be much harder. He had never snuck so many people out of Hogwarts before, but he felt fairly confident in his abilities. Most of the school was finishing up dinner by now. He could only hope the rest of his friends were doing a good job of hiding their absence from Umbridge and anyone else who might care. Ginny happened to have stink pellets in her pockets, so she dropped a few on the stairwell as a diversion. Then they were sprinting through the corridors, camouflaged by magic. Harry skidded to a halt at the witch statue. "Descendium," he murmured, tapping her hump with his wand. "Quickly, in here." He directed all of his friends down the tunnel, waiting until they were all safely inside before jumping in himself. It felt like it took an eternity. The corridor remained undisturbed for what felt like hours, and Harry let out a breath of relief once he found himself in the cramped tunnel. "Do I keep going?" Neville asked, clearly leading the way. "Yeah, all the way to the end." "Where does this thing lead?" Daphne inquired as she began crawling. Harry chuckled. "You'll see in a minute." As they made their way down, Harry heard Neville's surprised gasp when his friend poked through the trapdoor and into Honeyduke's cellar. "Did Fred and George show you this?" Ginny asked, her voice filled with envy. "This explains so much." "In a way," Harry replied, momentarily forgetting that she didn't know about the Marauders map. "Okay, let's see if this works. Dobby!" After a brief pause, the elf appeared, looking far too happy to be aiding them in their rule-breaking. "How many of us can you take at a time?" Harry asked. Dobby eyed the group. Dobby is best taking 2 at a time, and not Harry Potter, sir, and his tall friend together, he said, gesturing to Neville. Harry nodded. Perfect. If you take Susan and Daphne first, then Neville and Ginny, and come back for Luna and me after. He figured if anyone stumbled upon Susan and Daphne alone, they'd be the most likely to talk their way out of any suspicious circumstances, being the 2 least connected to him. Okay, where is Dobby taking them? Harry blinked, realizing their plan had focused more on what to do inside the Ministry, rather than how to get there. Dobby, was it? Susan interjected tentatively. Do you know where the Muggle entrance to the Ministry of Magic is? The phone box? Harry couldn't believe there was even a Muggle entrance, but Dobby nodded, his ears flapping excitedly. Yes, miss, Dobby knows it. Perfect. Then take us there, please. Susan reached out one hand to Daphne and the other to Dobby. The Slytherin girl hesitated for just a moment before doing the same. In an instant, the 3 disappeared, and Harry held his breath. Harry held his breath, anxiously waiting for Dobby to return. Harry Potter sir's friends are in London, Dobby confirmed brightly. He quickly transported Ginny and Neville before returning for Harry and Luna. Harry squeezed his eyes shut against the odd sensation of elf travel. When he opened them, he found himself standing in a grimy side street somewhere in London, watching as Susan approached a heavily vandalized telephone box. "Can Dobby do anything else for Harry Potter and his friends?" the house elf asked eagerly. "Just don't tell Professor Umbridge where we are if she asks. Or anyone else, honestly," Harry replied. Dobby nodded enthusiastically, and Harry smiled. "Thanks so much for this, Dobby. I really appreciate it." "Dobby is glad to help," the elf chirped before vanishing. "I never realized house elves could transport people," Daphne remarked, her surprise evident. "House elves can do a lot of things people don't think about," Harry explained, then turned to Susan, raising his eyebrows. "Where's this entrance, then?" "Right here," Susan patted the phone box. "It'll be a tight squeeze, so I hope you don't mind getting cozy." It was indeed a tight fit, with all 6 of them crammed into the booth. Susan peered out from her corner against the glass. "Whoever can reach the phone, dial 62442. Harry, whose ribcage was pressed against the phone, snorted. "Very clever." He dialed the numbers, and a cool voice came through an invisible speaker, asking them to state their name and business. Before he could respond, Susan declared all 6 of them as John Smith, with the business of Ministry Evaluation. The badges clattered into the coin slot, and with a warning about needing to submit their wands for a security check, the phone box suddenly began to move. It sank below the pavement, and before long it was pitch black. "I hate this bit," Susan muttered. Harry wasn't a fan of it either, his mind conjuring memories of being locked in dark places, in his cupboard. Fortunately, it didn't last long. Soon, golden light began to spill from the area near their feet, gradually increasing until they found themselves no longer in a dark tunnel, but descending into what Harry could only assume was the Ministry atrium. In the center, there was a fountain featuring a large gold statue of various magical creatures being presided over by a witch and wizard, surrounded by an abundance of marble. It was incredibly extravagant as far as buildings went, but also completely empty. "This isn't right," Susan murmured. "There should be a security team." As the phone box touched the ground, they spilled out into the atrium, stretching their aching limbs after the cramped journey. "Do you think they're dead, or just gone?" Ginny asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Harry frowned. "Probably dark supporters, or maybe they were bribed to clear out for the night." His past experiences with the Ministry hadn't exactly painted it as a bastion of moral integrity. "Well, isn't it good for us that it's this quiet?" Daphne reasoned. less obstruction. She was technically right, but it didn't ease Harry's unease. Either way, we know something's certainly not right. "Harry," Susan said suddenly. When he turned to her, he noticed she looked pale. I've seen the Aurors and some other people Aunt Amelia works with do this thing with their Patronus, where they send messages. Do you know how to do that?" Her voice held a note of hope. Harry frowned. "In theory, yes." He remembered asking Remus to show him over the summer when he had seen the man summon Snape from his lab that way. "But I've never done it very far." "Why?" "Aunt Amelia should know what's happening," Susan explained. "She knows who to trust. If we could get a message to her, maybe she can gather the ministry workers who would actually fight back, or at the very least stop us from getting arrested once we're found here." She made a valid point. Harry reached for his wand, pulling it out. "Expecto Patronum." With that incantation, prongs sprang to life, casting a shimmering silver light across the polished marble floor. "Take a message to Amelia Bones. Tell her, Death Eaters are in the ministry. I'm here, and so is Susan. Bring whoever you trust." The stag nodded its massive head and then darted off toward a wall, vanishing from sight. A few tense moments passed. "Did it work?" Neville asked, his voice filled with hope. Harry shrugged. "No idea." Once the Patronus had disappeared, it was difficult to tell. "We should get moving," Luna urged, her voice echoing with an urgency that none of them wanted to dispute. They hurried to the lifts, wincing at the loud noise as the golden grills slid open. "Damn," Neville muttered, stepping quickly into the lift. Susan immediately pressed the button for level 9, and with more clanking the lift began its ascent. "Susan," Harry said after a moment, "I'm really glad you came with us. I didn't actually know where we were going." Susan let out a nervous giggle. "I've been down there with my auntie before," she explained, "but I'm glad I came with you too." Harry just hoped she wouldn't change her mind once the fighting started. The lift came to a jarring halt, and a calm female voice announced that they had reached the Department of Mysteries. Familiarity washed over Harry as he stood before the dark corridor he had seen in his dreams, with flickering torches and the plain black door that had haunted him for so long. A gentle pressure on his arm drew his attention, and he looked down to see Luna standing beside him, wearing a surprisingly determined smile. "We're with you," she said simply. That was all he needed. Harry took the lead, unfazed when the door opened easily for him. Inside was the circular room filled with doors and blue flame torches. What he didn't expect was for the room to start spinning as soon as the door closed behind them. Behind them, all 6 of them quickly drew their wands, huddling close to ensure that no one was left unprotected. But nothing leapt out at them. The walls spun until the blue flames faded to thin, neon lines in Harry's vision, eventually slowing to a halt. All the doors were identical, and Harry felt lost, unsure of where to go. "It didn't do that in my vision," he admitted. Now they couldn't even tell which door they had come from, let alone which one led to the Hall of Prophecies. "Aunt Amelia says the trick is just to ask," Susan whispered, a hint of fear in her voice. Harry frowned. It was worth a try. "Would you show me the way to the Hall of Prophecies? Please?" he added, hoping the room appreciated good manners. Suddenly, a door to his right swung open, and through it Harry glimpsed the same dancing lights he had seen in his dream. "That's the one," he confirmed, grinning as he strode toward it. "Brilliant, Susan." The Hufflepuff blushed happily, following him into the room. "Oh, Ginny gasped softly once they were inside. "It's beautiful." It took a moment for Harry's eyes to adjust to the brightness after the dark antechamber, but when they did, he realized the room was filled with timepieces. Clocks of all shapes and sizes lined the walls, from tiny pocket watches on stands to a grand grandfather clock against one wall. Hundreds of them were ticking away in near-perfect unison. The light came from an enormous crystal bell jar at the far end of the room, and Harry found himself drawn to it. It sparkled almost painfully bright, as if caught in some ethereal wind. In the very centre was a tiny, jewel-bright egg. The students watched as the egg drifted upward, beginning to hatch as it rose. Soon, a beautiful hummingbird emerged within the jar, but as it reached the top, it began to sink slowly, its feathers becoming bedraggled until, in a moment, it was an egg once more. The process was mesmerizing, and it took several cycles for Harry to tear his eyes away. Just past the jar, he noticed a shelf filled entirely with tiny hourglasses. Time-turners, he realized, recognizing the devices from his third year. Some were larger than others, but all would fit neatly in the palm of his hand or on a necklace chain. What kind of time-based magic existed in this room? What did the unspeakables even do down here? The questions were endless, but there was no time to answer them. "We need to keep going," Harry said softly. It felt like the kind of room where whispers were required. His words startled his friends out of their reverie, watching the hummingbird. Though they looked reluctant, they followed Harry to the door. It was definitely the right room. Shelves towered far above their heads, all filled with identical dusty glass orbs, illuminated by more blue flame candles. As they stepped into the room, a shiver crawled down Harry's spine, a stark contrast to the light and warmth of the time room. They all huddled closer together. "Where to now, Harry?" Ginny asked. Harry appeared at the silver numbers at the end of the nearest row. Row 97. They all pulled out their wands and started walking, staying tightly grouped together. This was where the plan would begin, and it was the part Harry had worried about. They reached row 97 and paused, peering into the darkness. "He's down the end," Harry said, pitching his voice a little louder than before. "He's here, I know it." He led the way down the row, finding it completely empty, just as he had expected. "He's got to be here somewhere." "No one's here, Harry," Ginny said gently, placing a hand on his arm. Harry tore his gaze away, looking instead at the shelves of orbs and reading the names on the small labels. Most of them were dim and dull inside, but a few still glowed with a faint light. He scanned the labels, searching further down the aisle. It had to be easy to find, or Voldemort wouldn't have... "Harry, come here," Daphne said urgently. Harry spun around to see her pointing at an orb on a shelf at eye level. When their eyes met, she gave him a quick nod. "This one's got your name on it." "What?" he replied, feigning confusion as he moved closer to inspect it. Sure enough, the small label read SPT to APWBD. Dark Lord and Harry Potter. That was it. Inside the faintly glowing orb lay the record of the words that had shattered his life forever, the words that had led to his parents' deaths, and 13 years of relative peace for the rest of the wizarding world. "Harry, don't touch it," Neville warned, but it was too late. Harry's hand was already reaching out, wrapping around the strangely warm glass. As he did, he cast a protective charm around it. Things were about to get messy, and he didn't want it cracking. "It's got my name on it," Harry argued. "That means it's mine." Suddenly, The air shifted, and all 6 of them tensed. "There are 2 names on that label, Potter," a cold, familiar voice drawled. Harry turned to face Lucius Malfoy, his pale hair glowing eerily in the blue light. "And the other owner would very much like that prophecy." Harry stepped in front of his friends, feeling them gather behind him, wands drawn and ready. Malfoy wasn't alone. A dozen shapes loomed in the shadows, more Death Eaters surrounding Harry and his friends. Harry glared at his boyfriend's father, wishing he could hex him into oblivion, show him everything he'd learned from Severus Snape. But now wasn't the time. "Where's Sirius?" he asked, refusing to flinch as the Death Eaters mocked him. But when a female voice chimed in, taunting him in an exaggerated baby voice, he felt Neville shudder beside him. In that moment, he knew exactly who the woman was. "Oh, and you've brought your little friends, how sweet," Malfoy remarked, his gaze drifting over the group behind Harry. "Miss Greengrass, I'm surprised to see you here. Your uncle will be most disappointed." "On the contrary, my uncle will be delighted I got the chance to tell you to go screw yourself in person," Daphne retorted with a sweet smile. Several Death Eaters growled, and one raised a wand, but a sharp look from Lucius stopped any spell from being cast. Harry felt a quiet surprise. It wasn't like Death Eaters to show hesitation, even when it came to hurting children. "Enough of this!" Bellatrix Lestrange shouted, trying to summon the prophecy, but Harry was quicker. The orb rolled to the tips of his fingers, prompting Malfoy to turn on her. "I told you no," he reprimanded. "If you smash it—" "Ah, so that was their concern, was it?" Harry smirked. "Why does Voldemort want it so badly?" he asked boldly, feeling proud of his friends for not even flinching at the name, while all the Death Eaters recoiled. Bellatrix Lestrange began screeching about his filthy mouth defiling her lord's name. Harry almost felt tempted to inform her that his filthy mouth had also defiled her nephew. But that was a story for another time. Slowly, he shuffled 1 foot back. The Death Eaters were focused on his hands, one holding his wand, the other clutching the prophecy. They didn't notice when the heel of his shoe tapped against the toe of Ginny's. He felt a quick tap back, and then the faint movement of a hand behind him. Harry continued to taunt Malfoy and his companions, keeping their attention firmly on him. He let Malfoy indulge in his villainous exposition, thinking he was clever as he led Harry to conclusions about what had happened to Podmore and Bode. Harry had to buy as much time as possible, silently praying that Sirius was able to reach the Order soon. He liked his chances against the Death Eaters and was eager to put some of Snape's spells into practice, but he didn't want to risk his friends. Then, faintly, he felt something warm in his pocket. His mirror. Help was on the way. "Now!" he yelled. In an instant, 6 wands were raised. 5 voices shouted reducto curses at the shelves, while Harry directed a cutting curse straight at Bellatrix Lestrange's chest. She screeched, moving just quickly enough that the curse grazed her arm instead, but it was enough to create chaos. Glass orbs shattered everywhere as shelves began to topple. Harry sprinted after Susan as they rushed for the exit, determined to destroy as much as possible in their wake. The fight had begun. They just had to hold on long enough for assistance to arrive. Chapter 72. As soon as Sirius stepped away from the mirror with Harry, he scrambled for his wand. He wasn't entirely sure if this would work, but he was determined to give it a try. It took him a moment to conjure a happy memory strong enough for a Patronus, but with thoughts of red hair and laughing blue eyes filling his heart, the Patronus took shape far quicker than he had expected. Sirius stared in awe at the large silver bear standing before him, waiting patiently. "Oh, Charlie," he thought, feeling a tightness in his chest. He couldn't remember what his Patronus had been before, but he was certain it hadn't been a bear. Shoving that realization aside, he focused on his original intent. "Go to Remus Lupin," he instructed the bear. "Tell him to end his fight now. A bigger one is coming. It involves our pup." The bear nodded and then gamboled off through the wall. Sirius tried to send as much love and happiness with it as possible, hoping it would reach Remus wherever he was, wherever the order was. Then all he could do was wait. To pass the time, he changed out of his muggle clothes and into some dueling robes. He tied his hair back, then loosened it, only to tie it again. He made a sandwich and paced up and down the kitchen while eating it. The clock on the wall ticked away, and each passing minute felt like an eternity. More than ever, Sirius despised his status as a fugitive. It was bad enough to watch the Order go out and save lives while he had to stay home. But knowing his pup was heading into danger with only a few of his school friends for support, that thought was almost enough to send him to the Ministry, with or without assistance. But that wouldn't help Harry. One man against however many Death Eaters, possibly Voldemort himself, wouldn't make a difference for Harry. Sirius took a steadying breath, reminding himself that Harry was surprisingly well trained for a 15-year-old, and that his friends had his back. Sirius had been practicing defensive magic all year. Just as he was gearing up to send another Patronus, the crack of apparition echoed through the hall. He turned to see Remus rushing into the kitchen, his eyes glowing with a golden light. The moon had only been out the night before, and the wolf within him was closer to the surface than ever. "What's happening with Harry?" he asked urgently. "Where's the rest of the Order?" Remus shook his head. "Still fighting. There were more Death Eaters than we anticipated. It turned into a bit of a mess. Everyone's all right," he added, noticing the alarm on Sirius's face. "Nothing we can't heal, and it's almost over. Kingsley tried to summon the on-call auras, but of course, they're bloody useless. The Death Eaters seem to be clearing out soon enough. Now, Sirius, what was that message about? You frightened the life out of me. Where's Harry?" "The raid was a diversion," Sirius replied. "Harry had a vision. Voldemort's going for the Ministry tonight." The colour drained from Remus's face. "Harry's going after him, isn't he?" His voice was filled with knowing. Sirius nodded grimly. "Yep, so you'd better get back to the Order and tell them to hurry up if they want to save this damned country." He had a lot of faith in his godson, but there was only so much one teenage boy could do. Still, he called Harry's name into the two-way mirror, hoping to confirm that his godson was safe while he waited for backup. There was no response. It took far too long, in Sirius's opinion, for the Order to gather at Grimmauld Place. It wasn't even the full contingent. Dumbledore was off doing whatever he pleased, and Sirius didn't really care, but he had taken Vance and Moody with him. That turned out to be a good thing. There was far less arguing without the three of them around. "Harry and some students have gone. I don't know who," Sirius continued. Sirius noticed the look of horror on every Weasley face in the room. "I don't know how many there are, but I promised we'd send backup as soon as possible." "I don't understand how they got into the Ministry to begin with," Arthur Weasley murmured. Kingsley let out a bitter chuckle, his robes stained with blood, a testament to the battle he had just fought. They all looked a bit worse for wear, and Sirius hoped they were ready for another fight. "They've been worming their way in for months, Arthur. That bloody Malfoy has been greasing palms everywhere. But I'll admit I didn't think they were at this stage yet." "They've blindsided us all," Remus cut in bluntly. But that doesn't matter. We need to get to the Ministry, fast. Shouldn't we have some sort of plan? Hestia Jones asked. Sirius shot her a glare. We can't plan for what we don't know. We have no idea of their numbers, but with Harry involved, there's a high chance Voldemort himself will be there. Several people flinched at the mention of his name. Likelihood is they've disabled the flu network and set up anti-apparition wards, Tonks declared, her face more serious than most would expect from her. She closed her eyes and spun slightly, her face contorted in concentration. Yeah, no dice. Shit. Sirius's stomach sank. If even she, as an aura, couldn't get through the wards... How far do the wards extend? Fred Weasley asked, his face unexpectedly serious. Half-mile radius, Kingsley informed them. That's our standard wards at least. No idea if they've raised their own or just triggered the existing ones. The twins bent their heads together, discussing it quickly. St. James's Park Station should work, right? Sirius mentally mapped out London, trying to recall anything he had learned about the Ministry's ward thresholds back in the days when they had been warned about them, just in case the wards had to be raised. Attack and backup will have to come from another direction, Tonks said, breaking the tension. Waterloo, she added with a nod. I was always taught to go to Waterloo. Sirius glanced around, his fingers tapping impatiently on his thigh. Has anyone here never been to Waterloo Station? He asked. Several hands went up, including Charlie's. Right. Buddy up. We need to get moving, Sirius instructed. We can't just rush in there, Jones protested. Sirius turned to her, his glare fierce. Harry is in danger, he roared. Every extra second counts. It's already going to take enough time to run from Waterloo to Whitehall. That silenced her, and chaos erupted as everyone scrambled to find an apparition partner. Sirius wasn't surprised when Charlie grabbed his hand, a wink exchanged between them as he stepped in close. I'm with you, he murmured. Oh, I'd best stay here. Wait for Albus, you know, Molly fretted from the side. Sirius looked at Charlie, squeezing his hand in reassurance. Molly hadn't figured them out yet. Bill hadn't mustered the courage to propose, but with each passing day, Sirius cared less and less. After his Patronus revelation, he cared even less right now. He wrapped an arm around Charlie's waist, offering a grin. Hold on tight. In an instant they squeezed through space, disappearing and reappearing just as quickly. Sirius looked around, quietly delighted that he remembered Waterloo well enough to apparate there, especially after 15 years. They landed in a dingy side street, and moments later Bill and Hestia appeared. Before he could forget, Sirius pulled out his two-way mirror, calling out for Harry again. Part of him hoped for a response, but a larger part knew there wouldn't be one. Harry wasn't in a position to chat. More cracks echoed as others apparated into whatever spot they remembered best. Soon, 11 of them were disillusioned and sprinting into the fray. They made their way toward Westminster Bridge, with Charlie still holding Sirius's hand. The half-mile run turned out to be longer than most of them had anticipated. Wizards weren't exactly known for their exercise habits. Fortunately, keeping fit was one of the few things Sirius could manage while stuck at home, so he had no trouble keeping pace with Charlie. The dragon tamer hardly seemed winded by the time they reached the Ministry's back entrance, an unassuming set of rickety stairs beneath a fire escape, with a door labelled "Staff Only" at the bottom. "I didn't know this was here," Charlie remarked. Sirius grinned. "Most don't. It's for emergencies only. And considering I'm not cramming 11 of us into that blasted phone booth, this will have to do." He hoped the others were keeping an eye on their non-ministry companions to guide them over. Truth be told, he had been too focused on Harry to think about it. Just then they heard footsteps approaching, and as charms fell away, several others came into view, some huffing and puffing more than the rest. Sirius strode over to Remus, who looked a bit pale. "You all right, Moony?" When Remus grinned, the wolf sparkled back in his eyes. "Better than ever, old friend," he promised, and Sirius believed him. Diggle was the last to arrive. As he caught his breath, Kingsley jogged down the stone steps, tapping his wand on the staff-only door. It swung open, and the bald-headed Aura let out a quiet sigh of relief. "This way," he urged. The group moved forward, wands raised. Sirius was right behind Kingsley. He was the only one coming into this fight fresh. More than fresh. He was eager for the chance to finally put his wand to use, to do something other than sit around and wait. The atrium was emptier than Sirius had ever seen it, and the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. "Where is everyone?" George asked in a low voice. "Department of Mysteries, I'd bet," Sirius replied grimly. A murmur of understanding swept through the group. They all had at least some idea of what Voldemort was after down there. They split up to take the lifts, and Sirius found himself with Remus, Charlie, the twins, and Arthur Weasley. As the lift rattled along, Charlie leaned his shoulder against Sirius's. "He's going to be fine," he said quietly. Sirius clenched his jaw. "Bloody better be." "He's Harry," Fred piped up, offering a weak grin. "He's always fine." "Terrifying in a fight," George agreed, and he would know, having spent months with the Harry Alliance. "And if he's got our sister with him, those Death Eaters will be wetting themselves already." Charlie visibly stiffened at the thought of Ginny fighting dark wizards. Sirius placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Hey, it's okay. If she's here, it's because Harry thinks she can handle it. He's protecting her." He caught the gaze of all the Weasley men with him. "They're just kids, Sirius," Charlie whispered, his voice ragged and heartbroken. Sirius understood. He felt the same way when he watched Harry learn multiple ways to kill a man, to fight against magic far more complex than anything he would learn in school. But it was too late to shelter the children now. The best way to protect them was to teach them to protect themselves. The lift doors shrieked open, and the 6 of them stepped into the corridor. They could already hear the sounds of battle. Sirius didn't wait for the rest of the group. He surged forward, heading for the door to the Department of Mysteries. But he didn't get very far. Charlie was still holding on to him and reeled him back in, kissing him before Sirius even realized what was happening. "Don't do anything stupid," the redhead growled. "All right? I'm not telling Harry I let you die on my watch." Sirius could only nod, feeling a blush creep onto his cheeks when Fred let out a quiet wolf whistle. He had forgotten that other people were around. "Well then," Arthur said quietly, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "That's a conversation best had later, I think." Sirius snorted, sharing an amused glance with Charlie. They had that to look forward to then. With that in mind, he turned toward the door and wrenched it open. Sirius had been to the Department of Mysteries twice as a young Aura, and both times he had found it utterly creepy. Now, it was just terrifying. Several doors were ajar, but all the noise seemed to be coming from one in particular. In the middle of the circular room, there lay an unconscious man, hog-tied and dressed in a Death Eater robe, with a snapped wand at his side. Sirius turned to see Fred and George quietly high-fiving. "That's our lot," Fred confirmed proudly. Sirius didn't waste a moment. He was already searching for his godson, running straight past the fallen Death Eater and into the room where the action unfolded. It was a large Colosseum-style chamber, with stone steps leading down to a plinth where an archway stood, a piece of faded black fabric draped from the stone. The old execution chamber. Of all the places to end up. As he glanced at the death veil, a chill ran through Sirius, but he didn't dwell on it. The room was in utter chaos. Duels erupted all around, and many Death Eaters appeared disarmed and unconscious, just like their comrade. A grin spread across Sirius's face as he launched himself into a fight with Rodolphus Lestrange, pulling the Death Eater away from a red-haired girl who bore a striking resemblance to Amelia Bones when they were children. "You're Sirius Black," the girl declared, ducking a spell that flew her way and sending back an impressive flame whip hex in return. "I am. I was framed. Harry can tell you all about it," Sirius replied. Above them, the rest of the Order poured in to join the fray, and he could see relief washing over the girl's face. Rodolphus let out a shout of rage at the intrusion. Sirius deflected a particularly nasty hex aimed at him with an obscure shield spell. While he kept Rodolphus distracted, the girl, most likely Susan Bones, was on the lookout for an opening. And she certainly found one. A stunner hit Rodolphus in the thigh, sending him crashing down like a sack of bricks. Without hesitation, Susan darted in, snatched the wand from the Death Eater's hand, and snapped it over her knee, showing no remorse. "Sirius!" The voice was familiar, and Sirius turned around, his heart clenching at the sight of his godson dueling Lucius Malfoy, dangerously close to the veil. Bellatrix Lestrange loomed behind them, but Tonks and Kingsley had her under control for the moment. Sirius hurried down the stone steps, dodging curses and retaliating with his own spells, leaping over yet another bound and disarmed Death Eater. It was almost embarrassing how many of them had been taken down by a handful of schoolchildren. "Looks like you hardly needed help, kiddo," Sirius called out as he reached Harry's side, raising his own shield to block Malfoy's entrail-expelling curse. Harry flashed him a breathless grin. "Still good to see you." Harry unleashed a wordless jet of lurid purple magic at Malfoy, narrowly missing him. If the situation hadn't been so dire, Sirius would have paused to admire how his 15-year-old godson held his ground against Voldemort's right-hand man. Harry looked anything but overwhelmed, determination blazing in his green eyes. All around them, the Death Eaters were realizing just how outnumbered they were, falling to spells, many of which came from the students. "The only reason you're not dead is that you still hold that prophecy, Potter," Malfoy sneered. "But I have no qualms about killing your dog-father here." As if to prove his point, he sent a killing curse shot towards Sirius, and he ducked just in time. "Just try it," Harry challenged, and his bone-breaker spell struck Malfoy square in the shoulder, eliciting a pained groan. Harry pressed forward, eager to capitalize on his advantage. But over his shoulder, Sirius saw Tonks go down under a bolt of blue light, and he noticed Bellatrix turning in Harry's direction. Instinctively, the Animagus jumped to shield his godson, the two of them moving in sync. Malfoy attempted to circle around, edging closer to the veil, searching for a way to split them apart. In that moment, the chaos of the room faded into the background for Sirius. He couldn't allow himself to be distracted. The only thing that mattered was protecting James's boy, his pup. Bellatrix cackled, throwing a taunt his way, but Sirius merely laughed and shot back a spell. She had been mad before Azkaban, and now she was even more unhinged. But fear was no longer a part of his response, only pity. He noticed her fatigue. Blood soaked one arm of her robe, and the hem was charred. He wondered if she had even faced Harry Potter yet. "No!" Harry shouted suddenly. Sirius turned just in time to see Harry deflect a spell with his bare hand, sending it ricocheting back at Malfoy. The blonde wizard, caught off guard, didn't have time to dodge, and the magic hit him squarely in the stomach. It knocked him backward, right into the middle of the stone archway. Sirius felt the moment it happened. The whispers of the dead behind the veil grew louder in his ears for a brief, horrifying moment, and the room's temperature plummeted. Then, with astonishment etched on his face, Lucius Malfoy was gone. Another victim of a magic that no one truly understood. A piercing scream shattered the air. Bellatrix stared wide-eyed at the spot where her brother-in-law had just stood, fury twisting her features. "No!" she shrieked, and Sirius instinctively moved to shield Harry from her wrath. But Bellatrix wasn't after him. She was racing up the stairs, her skirts billowing behind her as she aimed for the door. Sirius glanced at Harry, whose face had turned a sickly grey. The scar on his forehead burned a vivid red. "He's coming," Harry rasped, and then he was off. Watching Draco's father vanish into the strange, whispering veil felt like it took an eternity. At first, Harry wasn't worried. He was more puzzled about the wandless, wordless shield he had conjured without realizing it. He expected Malfoy to rise again, but he didn't. As soon as he touched the eerie curtain, he faded away, slipping through it like a portal to another realm. In an instant he was gone, leaving no trace behind. Harry had no time to dwell on it. Bellatrix's furious scream echoed through the room, and suddenly his scar flared to life. He understood immediately what had happened. She had summoned her master for reinforcements. "He's coming!" Harry warned Sirius, sprinting up the stairs and barely glancing around the rest of the room. He wasn't truly worried. They had been holding their ground even before the order arrived. He hoped that between Tonks and Kingsley, the Death Eaters they had taken down would remain captured. Some, however, were more than just unconscious. Harry had never asked his friends to kill, and would never impose that on them. But he found himself without such reservations at this moment. Snape had taught him to be ruthless with his cutting curses and any other magic that could give him an advantage. With whatever remnants of the enemies still standing, everything seemed under control, so Harry didn't waste time checking on anyone. Bellatrix was heading for the atrium, and he had to follow. Harry wasn't going to let her get away. Waiting in the lift felt surreal. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind still burned with the image of Lucius Malfoy vanishing behind the veil. How on earth was he going to tell Draco that he had killed his father? Would Draco thank him for it? He shook off those thoughts. He could deal with that later. When he arrived in the atrium, Bellatrix was screaming. He immediately shot a spell at her, but she blocked it effortlessly. "How dare you!" she yelled, her voice dripping with venom. "You jumped-up little half-blood. I'll kill you and pry the prophecy from your cold, dead hands." "It's far too late for that," Harry taunted in response. "It got smashed in the fight." He spoke with utter conviction, watching as Bellatrix turned pale with fury. "Impossible. You're lying." Her words erupted into an inhuman shriek as she tried to summon the orb, but nothing happened. Harry felt the Dark Lord's arrival before he saw it. A searing pain shot through his scar, forcing him to use all his limited occlumency skills to push it away. Once the blurriness faded, he saw the snake-like figure standing before him, Bellatrix prostrate at Voldemort's feet. "You smashed my prophecy, Potter?" Voldemort asked, his voice high and cold. Harry smirked. "Yep, my bad." A cry of rage erupted from the Dark Lord, while Bellatrix sobbed loudly. "You worthless little fool. I shall make you experience pain so profound that you will long for death. Months of preparation, and my Death Eaters have let Harry Potter thwart me again." "Well, you know what they say," Harry shot back, dodging a killing curse. "If you want a job done right, you've got to do it yourself." He felt a flicker of relief that everyone else was downstairs, unaware of the reckless taunting he was dishing out to Voldemort himself. Adrenaline surged through his veins, and his plan had completely unravelled in his mind. All he could do now was hope that Amelia Bones had received his Patronus and was working on the wards as they spoke. Suddenly, a pillar of phoenix fire erupted, accompanied by a burst of birdsong. Albus Dumbledore had arrived. Harry gritted his teeth at the man's genial greeting, feeling as though he had just bumped into Voldemort while out for an evening stroll. But it was doing its job. The Dark Lord's attention was no longer on Harry. "It was foolish to come here tonight, Tom," Dumbledore reprimanded, magic radiating from him with such intensity that Harry felt it like a heat wave. Voldemort conjured a bright silver shield, and Dumbledore's magic struck it with a sound like a gong. "The Aurors are on their way." That was a relief, though Harry couldn't help but wonder why Dumbledore hadn't arrived with the rest of the Order. It didn't matter now. He shuffled backward toward the Golden Fountain, the only defensible position in the atrium. The duel between the two most powerful wizards in the world had begun, and Harry knew he wasn't going to get in the way. Their magic was flashy, that much he could say. They weren't fighting to kill, or even necessarily to harm. Dumbledore was fighting to intimidate, while Voldemort was doing everything he could to show he was not cowed by it. If it would have counted for anything, Harry would have cast a Sectum Sempra right then to cut Voldemort's head clean off. But that would only buy them a little time, until Voldemort resurrected himself. Hardly any time, considering he had servants who knew how to do it. Suddenly, the golden statue beside Harry sprang to life, the metal goblin leaping to intercept a killing curse aimed directly at him. Voldemort was trying to kill him again, clearly fed up with attempting to best Dumbledore. Harry stayed crouched low, wand in hand. Then there was a sound like a whip cracking, and the pressure in the air released so abruptly that Harry's ears popped. The wards had due. A sudden flurry of pops filled the air, and in an instant a crowd had gathered in the atrium. Among them stood Cornelius Fudge, looking dishevelled in his pyjamas. At the front of the group was a woman Harry recognized as Amelia Bones, her wand raised defiantly as she locked eyes with Voldemort. Fudge barely had time to gasp before Voldemort swept across the atrium towards Bellatrix, grabbing her by the arm and vanishing instantly. All around the atrium, fireplaces flared to life with green flames as witches and wizards rushed in. But Harry's attention was fixed on Fudge. The minister appeared to be having a fit, stuttering helplessly. He was, you know who, in the ministry. Great heavens, how can... I don't... Mr. Potter, Amelia Bones called out, prompting Harry to stand up straight and walk toward her. "Well met, Lady Bones," he greeted, eliciting a smile from her. "Well met," she replied, though her expression quickly turned serious. "Thank you for your swift warning. Very impressive Patronus, by the way." Harry offered a half-hearted smile. "Thank you. I wasn't sure it would make it. I've never sent a proper message before." "We would have arrived sooner, but it took time to get authorization to break the ministry's own wards," Madame Bones said, casting a scathing look at the still stammering minister. "What happened? Where's Susan?" "Department of Mysteries. Harry replied. "She was all right when I last saw her. They're all down there with a bunch of Death Eaters." Bones nodded sharply, then called to the Aurors, leading a group toward the lifts. Harry hoped Sirius had managed to escape before any officials arrived. "I will explain everything, Cornelius, as soon as I have sent Harry back to school," Dumbledore said loudly, reaching out to place a hand on Harry's shoulder. Harry tensed. "Harry Potter?" Fudge jolted, as if he had only just realized Harry was there. What's he doing here? What does this mean?" "As I mentioned, I will explain everything once he is safely back at Hogwarts," Dumbledore replied patiently. Harry glared at him, stepping back. "I'm not leaving without my friends." He raised his voice, making sure to draw attention. Anyone who hadn't been watching him was now. "Harry, my boy, you've been through a lot tonight," Dumbledore said soothingly. "You must get back to school, where Madame Pomfrey can check on you." "My friends need to get back too," he insisted. "Or do you not want the public to know that 6 schoolchildren defended the entire ministry from 24 Death Eaters for almost an hour and a half before anyone showed up?" A wave of whispers swept through the crowd, and Harry noticed Dumbledore's small wince. "I just want you to be safe, my boy," Dumbledore continued. "If you wanted me safe, then where were you half an hour ago when Lucius Malfoy was trying to kill me?" Harry shouted. Many onlookers gasped, and Fudge turned an interesting shade of puce. "He's dead, by the way. Fell through that weird veil thing. I'm assuming it kills people, at least." Harry wanted to make sure Malfoy's disappearance wasn't swept under the rug without acknowledgement. He needed as many people as possible to know what had happened. Dumbledore frowned, and before Harry knew it, the headmaster was reaching out to him, holding what looked like a bottle cap. He pressed it into Harry's hand, then pulled back and muttered a word. Suddenly, Harry was spinning, the world a riot of colour. The bastard had forced a portkey on him. He reappeared in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, which had been fully repaired since the last time he had seen it. The people in the portraits jumped in surprise, but Harry ignored them and headed straight for the door. It wouldn't budge. "Let me out!" he growled, shoving harder and putting magic into it. Whatever ward Dumbledore's magic held him firmly in place. "Let me out!" Harry shouted. The shelves rattled, and several of Dumbledore's strange trinkets exploded, but the door remained shut. His anger surged, his green eyes blazing with fury and magic. "Let me out!" He reached out to the castle, and the castle responded. With a sensation like a rubber band snapping, the door burst open. Harry leaped onto the revolving staircase, sending a wave of gratitude toward the castle's magic. As he stepped out, he was met with absolute chaos. He thought the castle had looked bad after Fred and George left, but this was 1,000 times worse. Paint was smeared across the walls, scorch marks dotted the floors, walls, and even the ceilings. As he descended the stairs, he saw students floating in giant bubbles, bobbing along merrily. He ignored those who waved at him, scanning the crowd for any familiar faces. Eventually, he stumbled upon the Patil twins, who were barricaded behind an overturned desk in the middle of the third-floor corridor. "Harry, you're back!" Parvati exclaimed brightly. "How did it go?" "Fine, yeah. Parvati, what the hell happened here?" The two sisters exchanged a glance. "We tried to keep Umbridge distracted," Padma explained, "but when she finally realized you were gone, she sort of pitched a fit. Then she tried to contact the ministry, and I guess that didn't work because she just lost it. She started screaming about coups and mutiny, and how the minister was going to have everyone jailed. Then Lee Jordan set off some fireworks, and she screamed and used the Cruciatus curse on him. Everything went a bit downhill from there. Harry stared at her in disbelief. I was gone for 5 hours. A lot can happen in 5 hours, Parvati replied with a knowing nod. Where are you going? I need to find someone. Don't worry, just keep doing whatever you're doing. He didn't want to know the details at this point. He was far too exhausted. Just watch out for the entrance hall, Padma called after him. Harry's brow furrowed with trepidation. He understood the warning as soon as he arrived. The entrance hall had been transformed into a swimming pool. Water covered the entire floor, and students were happily splashing around. Beach toys floated by, along with a few rubber ducks, some of which erupted into soap bubbles when touched. Harry blinked in disbelief. Shaking his head, he turned around and decided to use a parcel-tongue passage instead. The Chamber of Secrets was blissfully quiet, but Harry didn't linger. He headed straight for the wall that would lead him to Snape's office. Fortunately, Snape was inside and jumped to his feet at Harry's entrance. "Potter!" Snape exclaimed, rushing forward to grip Harry by the shoulders. "When did you get here? What happened?" Suddenly, Harry was hit by a wave of exhaustion, the events of the day crashing down on him all at once. He swayed forward, resting his forehead against Snape's thin chest. "The Ministry is safe. We captured a bunch of Death Eaters, and Fudge saw Voldemort in the flesh. And Lucius Malfoy is dead." Snape tensed at that last revelation. "Dumbledore's talking to Fudge now. He forced a portkey on me. I don't know where Neville and the others are." With any luck, they had been moved to the hospital wing, or at least away from the Ministry. Fingers gently gripped Harry's chin, tilting his head up to meet Snape's gaze. "Let me in," Snape urged, and Harry didn't have the energy to argue. He welcomed the man's legilimency, shoving the memories of the entire evening toward him. He wasn't sure how long they stood there, how much real time passed while Harry shared flashes of the last 5 hours, but eventually Snape pulled away. To Harry's surprise, the usually stoic potions master pulled him into a hug. "You bloody marvel, Potter," he said. Harry laughed. It wasn't just me, the others helped too. They had been incredible, far better than he had ever imagined. Snape smirked lightly. "Indeed, I could spend the rest of my life re-watching the memory of Rabastan getting his wand snapped right before his eyes, and I would die a very happy man." Harry grinned. It had been Ginny who did that, once she had him tied up by his own robes. Then she had punched him in the face, breaking his nose, before stunning him unconscious. It was brilliant. "I don't know what to tell Dumbledore," he blurted out. "He will need to know at least some of the truth. The portraits in the head's office will tell him you accessed your family magic to get out." Harry felt a blush creeping up his cheeks. Perhaps that had been a bit foolish, but he had felt so trapped. "He can't find me here," he suddenly realized. Snape nodded. "I have been down here waiting to hear word, and ignoring the rebellion, quite frankly," he added, incredulity lacing his voice. "But from what I've heard through the house elves, your little defense club has gathered in the Great Hall to try to begin putting things to rights. The headmistress is indisposed." Harry didn't want to know what that meant, but he nodded anyway, turning to the open space in the wall. He paused at the threshold. "Remus was fine when I left that veil room." Snape's nod in response was terse. "And I'm sure he continued to be fine after you were gone." That was that, and Harry didn't press further. Continuing on his way, he followed a passage in the chamber that he had never used before, but he knew it would leave him up to the Great Hall. No one seemed to notice him stepping out from the wall beside the hourglasses, which were now completely empty. The house elf information network had been correct. Harry could see at least half of the members of the Hogwarts Alliance gathered in the centre of the Great Hall. The Hufflepuff table was surprisingly in decent shape, especially considering the state of the rest of the castle. Yet, the signs of recent chaos were evident if you knew where to look. "I leave you lot alone for 5 bloody minutes," Harry burst out, startling everyone around him. He quickly cast a shield spell to deflect the curses aimed in his direction. "Harry!" Angelina exclaimed, her eyes wide with surprise. "Where have you been?" "It's complicated. I'll explain later," he replied, feeling the intense gazes of the other heirs on him. "What happened here? I got a bit of a rundown from the Patils on the 4th floor, but honestly, it didn't make much sense. And then there was the swimming pool." Several people snorted at that. "We've got it under control now," Cho assured him. "Mostly. We dealt with the worst of it once Umbridge was unconscious." Harry's eyebrows shot up. "Unconscious?" A number of hands pointed toward the head table, where a large pink blob caught his attention. It took him a moment to realize it contained the High Inquisitor, encased in some strange bubblegum-colored slime, looking limp and distinctly ruffled. "She's fine, we think," Justin Finch-Fletchley said with a nonchalant shrug. "She got hit by about 60 different spells, so the mix was interesting. It took a while to reverse it all. We'll get her up to Pomfrey once we've dealt with the swimming pool." "Do we have to?" Colin Creevey sighed. "I've always wished Hogwarts had a pool." "Maybe not one in the entrance hall, though," Harry pointed out, and Colin huffed. "Spoil sport." Harry surveyed the group, counting heads. "Where's Lee?" he asked, recalling what Padma had mentioned. Angelina scowled. "With Pomfrey. That witch didn't keep him under for long, luckily, but it was awful." Harry, who had experienced more than his fair share of Cruciatus curses, nodded in sympathy. "And the professors?" Harry scanned the sea of sheepish faces around him. "Most of them are upstairs, dealing with the 6th floor, Blaise volunteered. "It got difficult." Harry definitely didn't want to know the details. "Right then," he replied, wishing he could just curl up in a corner and sleep. But clearly the universe had other plans for him. "I think stories can wait a bit. Let's get rid of that pool, yeah?" The group made their way toward the doors, and Hannah slipped into the space beside Harry. "Where are the others?" she whispered urgently. "Safe," Harry replied, hoping it wasn't a lie. Groans echoed through the hall as the head aura arrived to disrupt the impromptu pool party. Harry raised his wand, aiming at a purple rubber duck floating nearby. 20 minutes later, that was where Dumbledore found him, fishing second years out of the pool while they begged him to let it stay for just a couple of days. To Harry's surprise, the headmaster didn't look nearly as alarmed as he had expected, considering the chaos surrounding the school. In fact, he chuckled as one daring Gryffindor flung himself back into the water the moment Harry turned his back. "Mr. Potter, a word, if you don't mind," Dumbledore called out. A cheer erupted at the sight of him, but all Harry felt was a cold dread. Reluctantly, he levitated himself over the pool, landing by Dumbledore's side, and followed the headmaster back up the stairs. "I was surprised not to find you waiting in my office, Harry," Dumbledore said. "Yes, well, I was surprised to find myself in there to begin with," Harry replied evenly. "Involuntary portkey, definitely not a fun experience, especially with my history of them." "Ah, I do apologize, but it was necessary to remove you from that situation. Cornelius is already quite volatile lately. I didn't want to risk your safety," Dumbledore explained. Harry held back a snort. It sounded like a convenient excuse. More likely, Dumbledore didn't want any interruptions while he spun whatever stories suited him best. "And what about the safety of my friends? Where are they?" All have been removed to the hospital wing, Dumbledore informed him. Without hesitation, Harry turned down the corridor leading in that direction. Dumbledore had been trying to guide him back to his office. "Harry, I must insist you come with me for a moment," the headmaster urged, but Harry continued walking. "I want to see my friends. I need to make sure they're okay." "You didn't seem so concerned for their safety when you led them into danger," Dumbledore said wisely. Harry shot him a glare. "They volunteered. They knew exactly what they were getting into. I'm still worried about them. Or do you not care about the lives of everyone you send into battle?" "Those I send into battle are adults." "I'm not," Harry pointed out sharply. "And yet you managed just fine on that front," Dumbledore replied. Harry felt his temper rising. Perhaps he was losing it a bit, but after the day he'd had, the last thing he wanted was to explain himself to Dumbledore just so the man could offer some cryptic advice and sweep it all under the rug. "Harry, my boy," Dumbledore said, his tone tinged with disappointment, "I must confess I'm worried about you. You have been different this last year." "Maybe I'm just growing up," Harry snapped. "Seeing your friend murdered in front of you will do that to a person." As they reached the hospital wing, Harry's shoulders relaxed at the sight of all 5 of his friends sitting up in hospital beds, no longer covered in blood, dust or splinters like they had been when he last saw them. They looked relieved to see him too. "How are you? Were any of you hurt?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "Nothing Madame Pomfrey couldn't fix," Ginny assured him. "She wants us all to stay overnight, but we'll be fine tomorrow." That was excellent news, and Harry beamed at her. "Ah, Mr. Potter," Madame Pomfrey greeted, stepping out of her office. "I was hoping you would arrive soon. Go on then, hop onto the bed and let me check you over." Harry didn't argue with the nurse. Madame Pomfrey was perched on the edge of Harry's usual bed, focused as she performed her diagnostic spells. "I have pieced together a vague series of events from various members of the Order," Dumbledore began, "but I would like to hear your side of things, Harry. I'm very intrigued to learn how 6 of my students made it all the way to London unaided." Harry bit his lip, scrambling to find a way to avoid implicating Dobby. "We rode the Thestrals, sir," Luna chimed in suddenly, her voice as dreamy as ever. Dumbledore turned his attention to her. "Thestrals, Miss Lovegood?" Luna nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir. Professor Hagrid taught us about them. They're very fast, aren't they?" Her pale blue eyes blinked owlishly. Dumbledore's lips pursed, but seeing the rest of the group nodding in agreement, he decided not to press further. "Indeed. Well then, it is fortunate they carried you safely." Madame Pomfrey healed a cut on Harry's cheek and tutted at him. "Nothing but scrapes and bruises, Potter. All 6 of you are lucky as can be, going up against full-grown wizards like that." Harry couldn't help but grin, exchanging a knowing look with his friends. Luck had nothing to do with it. Those full-grown wizards weren't nearly as formidable as they had been made out to be. "Excellent," Dumbledore said, clasping his hands together. "Then, if you please, Harry, come to my office and we can discuss the events of tonight." Harry shook his head. "We can do that here, sir. I trust my friends. Shouldn't they know what they risked their lives for?" He had to tread carefully, and wished one of his guardians were there to support him as his thoughts felt scrambled. "Voldemort wanted me to get a prophecy, but it smashed during the fight." Dumbledore's eyes darted quickly to the other students, but none of them reacted. After a moment he sighed. "It smashed? You are certain?" Harry nodded. Harry felt a surge of anger as he recalled the moment. "I suppose it was important, but it's gone now." He infused his voice with just the right amount of regret, curious about what the headmaster would say next. Would he reveal that he knew the full words of the prophecy? But Dumbledore remained silent on that front. "Indeed it is," Dumbledore sighed. "A shame. But do not fear, Harry. Prophecies usually have a way of being fulfilled even when no one has heard them." Anger bubbled within Harry. Yes, prophecies did get fulfilled, especially when meddlesome old goats were pulling strings without anyone noticing, cursing babies to be used as weapons when they grew. "Tell me, my boy, what urged you to go to the ministry tonight? You knew your godfather was in no danger." "Voldemort was going to take the ministry," Harry retorted. "The Order was busy. I wasn't going to sit back and let that happen." It turned out to be the right choice, considering how long we were there before the Order joined us, before you showed up. Late as always, but just in time to take the most glorious part of the fight and control the narrative of the outcome. "I apologize that you felt there was no other option," Dumbledore said, his tone heavy with concern. "I knew things would get difficult once I was no longer at the school, but throwing yourself into danger is never the answer, Harry." "But it worked. Look at us, we're fine." Harry gestured toward his friends. "The Order is fine." He paused, uncertainty creeping in. "They are, aren't they?" "Nymphadora Tonks may need some time in St. Mungo's, but that is the worst of the damage," Dumbledore confirmed, bringing Harry a sense of relief. "See? We stopped the Death Eaters, prevented a ministry coup, and stopped Voldemort from getting his hands on the prophecy. I don't think you can be mad at us for that, sir." Dumbledore clearly did not appreciate this version of Harry, the one who spoke back to him, though he was trying to maintain his composure in front of Madame Pomfrey and the other students. "Be that as it may," Dumbledore began, continuing the conversation. "May," Harry said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice, "it was an enormous risk to take, and to expect your friends to take with you." "If I had seen another option, sir, I would have taken it," Harry replied evenly. "But I didn't, and it's done. The only person who died is Lucius Malfoy, so I don't really see that as a loss." Something flickered in Dumbledore's eyes. "Death is always a loss, Harry. Rather him than anyone I care about." "I'm sure the people who care about Lucius Malfoy would argue that. His son, perhaps." Harry didn't know whether to laugh or curse the old man. He had no idea how Draco felt about his father. He would feel plenty of guilt over the situation, but that wouldn't make him regret it. He hoped that Draco would agree. "It has been a long and difficult evening," Dumbledore finally said. "I'm sure once you've had some rest, we can return to this conversation with a more level head." His tone was unbearably patronizing, but at this point Harry was ready to accept any end to the conversation. "Great. I'm off to bed then." "I'm sure Poppy would much prefer you spend the night with your friends here," Dumbledore began, but Harry shook his head. "Nope, I'm not injured. I'm not staying here." He wanted to be properly reassured that his friends were all right, but that wasn't going to happen with Dumbledore lurking around. There was no way Harry was leaving himself exposed by staying in the hospital wing overnight. "Harry, please." "I'll come see you guys in the morning," Harry promised his friends, ignoring the headmaster. "Tell Hannah to come visit in the morning too, will you?" "She'll be worried about me," Susan added. Harry gave a thumbs up and was out before anyone could argue, making a beeline for the room of requirement. It took the form of his bedroom at Serendu, and the sight of it tore at his heart. A quiet groan escaped Harry's chest. "Kerry," he called, and in an instant the elf appeared. She surveyed him with concern in her large brown eyes. "Master Harry is hurt." "I'm fine, Kerry," he reassured her. "Can you—" would you take a message to Draco for me, please? If he's alone, tell him I'm back and I'm up here." Kerry nodded and vanished, only to return moments later. "Master Draco is on the way, and Kerry brought Master Harry's pyjamas." She held out the bundle of fabric, making Harry grin weakly. "Thanks, Kerry." The elf smiled and disappeared, leaving Harry alone. The room could have provided a shower, but he was too exhausted to even consider it. A weak cleaning charm rippled sluggishly over his skin once he peeled off his school uniform, but the clean pyjamas felt good enough. He sighed in relief as he rolled onto the bed, not even bothering to pull back the duvet. A million thoughts swirled in his mind. He needed to check on Sirius and Remus, along with the rest of the Order. He had to figure out what had happened at the school while he was gone, and he needed to confront Dumbledore about whatever the man had told Fudge. But all of that could wait until morning. The one thing that couldn't was Draco. Harry needed to tell him about his father before the rumors started. The door opened quietly, and Harry looked up to see Draco slip in. The blonde was visibly relieved to see Harry, and made a beeline for the bed, pulling him into a tight hug. Finally, the knot in Harry's chest began to unravel. He was safe, and he was with Draco. It was over. But he still had to deliver the bad news. "Thank goodness you're safe. I was so worried," Draco breathed, scattering kisses across Harry's cheeks. "The school has been madness while you were gone. You'll never believe some of the things they pulled, but that... I swear that hag is never coming back to this castle after tonight," Draco said with a smirk. But then he paused, taking a proper look at Harry's drawn face, and faltered. "What happened? What's wrong?" There was no easy way to say it. "Draco," Harry sighed, his fingers clenching around the Slytherin's shirt. "It's... Your father died at the ministry. It was my fault. I'm sorry." Draco froze. Harry's heart sank as he watched his boyfriend, searching for any sign of a response: sadness, anger, relief. But Draco was just blank. "Oh," Draco finally said, What happened?" Harry took a deep breath and told him about the fight, the strange veil, and the spell he had deflected with his hand. He held Draco the entire time, feeling the tiny shudders racking his body. When he finished, he bowed his head, waiting for judgment. But Draco just held him tightly. "He was trying to kill you," Draco rasped, and Harry nodded. "Then, it's not your fault. He brought it upon himself. Draco shook his head, lying down. Harry eyed him cautiously, unsure whether to move closer or give him some space. "I never thought I'd be rid of him. Not truly. Certainly not before the Dark Lord died." He ran a hand over his pale face. "I'm free. Mother's free. My father is dead." The words seemed to echo through the room. Draco stared at the ceiling for several long, silent moments. Then he looked at Harry, and his expression softened. "You look exhausted." He pulled himself into a sitting position. "We can talk about everything else once you've had some sleep." "Stay with me?" Harry asked desperately, wincing when his voice cracked. Draco leaned over, pressing their foreheads together. "Of course, you daft lion. I'm not going anywhere," he promised. Harry's heart ached. His whole body ached too, now that the adrenaline was fading. But mostly he felt a deep sense of relief, knowing he wasn't alone. Harry felt the weight of his emotions crashing over him, nearly pushing him to tears. Among all those feelings, his love for Draco stood out the strongest. Draco kicked off his shoes and slipped down to his boxers, while Harry hesitantly settled himself under the duvet. He wished their first night sleeping together in a real bed was under happier circumstances, but there was no way he was letting go now. As soon as Draco joined him, Harry pressed himself against Draco's chest, and the blonde boy's slender arms wrapped tightly around him, creating a safe cocoon. With Draco whispering soothing words, assuring him that everything would be all right, Harry drifted off to sleep.